Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
I just felt like I was about to go ham because basically, you know, all the black people who were complaining about, you know, their mistreatment and the grievance that I filed, all of a sudden they just got amnesia and everything's okay, and basically threw me up under the bus. And, you know, I was left to defend myself. Only one other coworker who's a black male, he's an older gentleman, and, you know, he came and talked to me, but all these other, I'd better not say that, all these other black coworkers, and you got, it was, what, two so-called Puerto Ricans who clearly, and I quote, stated that they were neither black nor white, or they're just in between. And I'm sitting up here like, this just reaffirms what I already know, and that's why it's never going to change. I mean, I believe in Mr. Fuller's work, but that's just one thing I do not agree on. I do not consider so-called people like that as black or whatever they want to consider themselves, because at the end of the day, they are going to side with those white people, and that's just a well-known fact. And so I'm to the point now, I don't really care too much what happens. I will never consider doing anything that is going to be, I guess, constructive in helping black people. I just won't do it anymore. I'm just going to worry about me, and, you know, to each his own. I mean, we make choices every day, and I just don't see how we can continue to make excuses for how we treat one another. I mean, I'm not perfect by any means, but I know I'm consciously aware of when I'm doing something wrong to somebody. And I just can't, maybe it's because of my upbringing, I just can't use the excuse to a certain degree that I'm a victim to the point where I don't know what I'm doing to myself or to others. If I say I have your back, I have your back. And I'm not going to back down in front of white people. I could tolerate and put up with white people. I cannot tolerate and put up with us. That's what I'm having a problem with.
Fear spread among Lil George's band of pickers after that losing day in the tangerine groves. The owner had come out and seen them not picking. All these walkouts, and there might come a time when the packing house wouldn't let them work at all. The boss men might blame them for the fruit hanging unpicked in the trees. A picker would end up hanging from a tree himself before long if this kept up. They talked among themselves when George, Mud, and Sam weren't around. They didn't like how George in particular had a way of being what they considered impudent with white people in a way that made everyone nervous. Things had gone too far, as the other pickers saw it. These boys had been up north and were going to get all of them killed. That night, after the defeat over the tangerines, they went in secret to the owners of the grove. "Us come by to tell y'all how come us didn't work today," they said. "Them boys, Sam and Mud and Lil George, you know them is bad. Them boys is bad. We know y'all has always done a good part by us colored folks, and we wanted to work. But them boys told us if we put a ladder in their tree, they gonna snatch the ladder up and stomp us when we hit the ground. So we scared. We know y'all is good white folks and has always done a good part by us. And it wasn't none of us. George Swanson Starling. He was still too mad thinking about why he was on that train in the first place. I was angry," he said later, conjuring up emotions of 50 years before. I was angry with my people. We caused them to earn more money in one day than they ever earned in a whole week. And they would complain us not letting them work 1 or 2 times. It was only about 2 or 3 occasions where we didn't work because we didn't get the price we asked for. And they go to the man's house at night and complain. They made it even worse for us. They couldn't see that we were helping them till after we all scattered. I was sick of them gossiping, lying Negroes in Eustis, and I wasn't never coming back there no more. I was never going to put my foot back there no more in life because they had spoiled my experience, and I was finished.
Yeah, that's pretty much what's going on. I don't even know.
Standard, that's pretty much been how things have been going for the duration of racism, white supremacy. It's very easy, very, very easy when you have people that are subject to you to get them to turn on one another, particularly workplace situations. That's to be expected. I think Mr. Fuller has said that repeatedly. When you're on the job, you for sure are by yourself. You don't have an army, you don't have backup, and I think I've heard him say consistently, that's exactly what happened in your situation. That's what you should expect every time. For all of the black people that are there, to name call you, turn on you, support. I mean, that's what you should expect from every single black person, every single non-white person who works there, janitor, all the way up to the highest position. That's what you should expect. And even if you ask him, he has some anecdotes where he said that exact thing happened to him, where he was doing what you said you were doing, trying to help out some of the other non-white co-workers and trying to get things that would benefit all of them, and they did the same thing. That's what you should expect from people that are in fear and have been terrorized for centuries. I know you said it's difficult for you to think of them as victims, but I mean that's classic.
It really is. I'm having a hard time using that word towards these individuals because it's just ass backwards all day.
That's what George said. Warmth of other suns. That's what George said. I think like 60, 70 years ago, as he was frustrated with black people in Florida. Context of White Supremacy. Justice Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date is Friday, September 6th, 2013, so I have been told. The clips you heard at the beginning of the broadcast from our compensatory call-in, the most recent call-in, August 31st, we had one of our listeners in Florida who was talking about some of her frustrations in the workplace with other victims of racism who were not supportive of her efforts to try to combat racism and ended up siding with the white people, helping them out. And I said, wow, that sounds so familiar to what we have been talking about in the book study session and even to what I've heard before. As I said, I think during that call-in, Mr. Fuller has talked about that as well. As long as the system of racism, white supremacy exists, anytime, anywhere on the planet, particularly on the job, you are an army of one. Expect massive opposition from all white people and most, if not all, of the victims of racism. That's what victims of racism tend to do. Invest if you think the program is constructive. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. The PayPal is in the top right corner. Invest if you think the program is constructive, listener-supported talk radio. You can also invest. Visit the wish list at Amazon.com. It is under Gus T Renegade. I have books and other items that I think are constructive. You can invest that way. You can also invest by sharing links to the program. You can put it on Facebook, Twitter. If you have other social media networks, you can link to it there. If you have your own website or blog, you can put the player so people can listen to the program on your site, or you can link to specific episodes that you think are constructive, finding other ways to get the content out to non-white people, victims of racism. This is our 7th study session on Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration. Also interesting to note, I heard one of the interviews that Miss Wilkerson did with Charlie Rose, racist suspect, played some of his clips before when he was talking with, at the time, Senator Obama as well as Toni Morrison. He talked with Miss Wilkerson and she shared many interesting things. I might play a sound clip from that interview later, but she shared that all three of the main characters, Mae Gladney, Dr. Robert Pershing Foster, and George Starling, all three of them died before she was able to get the book published. So they never saw the final product, which I thought was kind of a sad note to add in as well. At any rate, I want to go ahead and get started. 7th session, we ended last week where young Jules, his family, they were trying to smuggle him into a hotel. Contraband, I think that was the metaphor, like a sack of groceries. It seemed that most of his family, they could pass, they could be accepted as white, and young Jules could not, and how that warped his psyche and self-esteem, self-respect for many, many years after that incident. That's where we're picking back up at. Looking forward to, I think we'll be at the halfway point by the end of this week. Context of White Supremacy, Isabel Wilkerson, The Warmth of Other Suns.
The grandfather and his wife walked up to the front desk, and he asked for a room as a white person would. The clerk checked him in and gave him the key and pointed him in the direction of the room. Now he had a place for the night, but he also had a problem. They had to get Jules into the room without the front desk discovering what Jules was. They went back to the car to gather their things. The grandfather got his wife and daughter and the 2 children who looked white out of the car. It was late at night now, and the grandfather, tired from the drive and the stress of the moment, scrambled to sneak Jules out of the car without detection. For the plan to work, Jules would have to do what was not natural for a 10-year-old boy. He would have to keep still and be perfectly quiet and not let his arms and legs stick out or rear up his head out of the blanket or let anybody see him. There was no time to explain why they had to hide him and not the other children, or why he was the only one who couldn't under any circumstances be seen, while the others would walk in like normal. Somehow he had to understand how imperative it was that he not let a patch of his brown skin show. Everywhere the family went, little Jules stood out from the rest of the family, and that was hard enough. Now he was being sneaked into a strange place in the middle of the night as if he were contraband. The grandfather put the blanket over Jules, sitting in the back seat. He tucked the little boy's brown arms and legs under the blanket to make sure they didn't show. He lifted the little boy in his arms like a bag of groceries and carried him into the room. That is how they managed to get a bed for the night. But it was said that the memory stayed with Jules, and that he was not quite ever the same after that. Like most colored people making the journey, Robert could not pass for white, and was not in a position to try to fool his way into a room, which is not to suggest that all who could did. In fact, he found it sad and equally humiliating to have to deny who you were to get what you deserved in the first place. No, for him and for most people in his predicament, you were not free till you had cleared the gate. But even a border's borders are not always clear. Where is it safe to assume you are out of one country and well into another? When can you sigh a sigh of relief that you have passed from the rituals of one place into those of the other side? Robert took nothing for granted. He assumed he was not out of the South until he was a safe distance from El Paso. He gave himself breathing room and was more cautious than most. He did not want to subject himself to the indignities of being colored any more than he had to, and so would make no attempt to stop and inquire until he was all but certain he had a shot at a room. He crossed into New Mexico and drove some more until he reached Lordsburg, some 4 hours past the border on those old 2-lane roads. Lordsburg was a dusty old frontier town with saloons famous for fist fights and a Southern Pacific Railroad track paralleling Maine. He would have had no reason to stop there if it didn't happen to be the only place in New Mexico he had been told that he could be assured of a place to sleep. The rooming house in Lordsburg was part of a haphazard network of 20th century safe houses that sprang up all over the country, and particularly in the South, during the decades of segregation. Some were seedy motels in the red light district of whatever city they were in. There were a handful of swanky ones, like the Hotel Teresa in Harlem. But many of them were unkempt rooming houses, or merely an extra bedroom in some colored family's row house in the colored district of a given town. They sprang up out of necessity, as the Great Migration created a need for places where colored people could stop and rest in a world where no hotels in the South accepted colored people, and those in the North and West were mercurial in their policies, many of them disallowing blacks as readily as hotels in the South. Thus there developed a kind of underground railroad for colored travelers, spread by word of mouth among friends, and in fold-up maps and green paperback guidebooks that listed colored lodgings by state or city. Colored travelers, hoping to plan their journeys in advance and get assurance of a room, carried the guidebooks in their glove compartments like insurance cards. But the books were often out of date by the time they were printed, the accuracy of their entries based on the fortunes of hoteliers who may have only been renters themselves. A colored traveler had to prepare for the possibility that he might arrive at a place in the guidebook only to find that the proprietor had been gone for years, and then have to take up the search for a room all over again. Still, the mere presence of the guidebooks and of word-of-mouth advice about places to stay gave a sense of order and dignity to the dispiriting prospect of driving cross-country, not knowing for sure where one might lay one's head. The rooming house in Lordsburg was forgettable and left no impression on him other than it was like all the other rooming houses that took in colored people. A bedroom with no assurance of a key, an old toilet down the hall, sheets the previous guest may have slept on. The rooming houses that catered to a colored trade usually had no competition, and their clientele had no choice. And so neither would Robert. The only bed he knew between Houston and Lordsburg was the bench seat of the Buick. Lordsburg was the first chance in 1,000 miles of road to sleep, and was the only certain sleep and shower before Los Angeles. He made the most of it. He was fussy about such things as the proper shave and a well-pressed shirt, so he took his time the next day. He got a later start than he should have. He had known that there were no guarantees for the first half of the journey, meaning the South, except for his Buick and Dr. Beale back in Houston. Now he was crossing over into the land of the free. He had known the rules in the South. He hadn't liked them, but he had expected them. There were no hotels taking blacks then, Robert remembered years later. Nope, none. So if you had a friend who would take you in, you went there, period, and you were through. And then you worried about the next stop. He was putting that all behind him now. He drove toward Arizona, confident that this was one thing he didn't have to worry about any more. Crossing over. Do you remember any good stopping places in Arizona or western Texas? Anything in Phoenix or El Paso? And what is the best route from here to the coast? I've never driven it, you know. The poet Arna Bontemps, in a letter to the poet Langston Hughes before a cross-country trip from Alabama to California. Western New Mexico, April 1953. Robert Joseph Pershing Foster. Late afternoon. The desert was different from anything he had seen before. Great bowl of sky. Fringe of mountain in the distance. He was soon in Arizona. The desert began playing tricks on the eyes. It seemed he was driving and standing still at the same time. Road signs began warning of dust storms. Gas stations sold bags of water for people to placate their overheated radiators. He couldn't wait to get to California. He drove through the dry earth and yucca as heat vapor stirred at the surface. He soon entered the flat plains of the Salt River Valley. The dry land sprouted fields of sorghum and soybeans. Crop dusters flew low in the distance. Night moved in from behind. The mountains were now crisp against the light of the falling sun. The next big city was Phoenix, and he drove in anticipation of it. As he drew nearer, a curtain of night cloud fell behind him to the east. He could see it coming in his rearview mirror. The sky turned navy, then black. He soon saw the outline of Phoenix off to his right, north of the highway. But the road would not take him where he wanted to go. It veered away from the lights and continued south and west along the outskirts of town. The 1,500 miles of driving caught up with him now. His eyelids grew heavy, and his head filled with the fog of the onset of sleep. It occurred to him that he had squandered his energy on the easiest leg of the journey, on the closely set hamlets with their billboards and ranch signs, the distractions and margaritas at the Mexico border, even gassing up and eating in Lordsburg. He did not regret it, but he was paying for it now. Ahead was the long stretch of aloneness in the desert. He thought he'd better stop now. If he looped back to Phoenix, he could poke around for a colored boarding house and be in a bed of uncertain hygiene in a couple of hours. But the highway continued away from the lights and into a vast darkness. He could lose an hour just trying to find his way back to town. He considered the options. He was a safe distance from the south, long past Texas and well beyond New Mexico. This far west, he wouldn't have to wander the city and hunt down the first colored person he saw for directions to where the colored people board. He was free now, like a regular American. Up ahead, a bank of neon signs popped up in the distance and fought one another over guests for the night. The motels sat low to the ground at angles from the road, little more than stretch trailers with rhinestone facades. He pulled up to the parking lot of the first one he came to. The car kicked up gravel dust as it crawled up to the vacancy sign that blinked the promise of a decent night's sleep. He noticed a white Cadillac convertible pulling into the parking lot, its mirror-slick chrome and the headlights shining onto the building. A man who could have been in a Brill Cream commercial was at the wheel, and next to him, a blonde lady friend. The man was laughing. The woman had her head on his shoulder. They were in their own world as they stepped out of the car and floated into the motel in front of him. It was a scene right out of the movies, and Robert's kind of place. He felt even better about this new citizenship he was acquiring. He had been driving since noon and was wrinkled from the ride. He was a formal man in a formal age, and so he couldn't go in like this. He brushed his fingers along the sleeves of his shirt and ironed the front with his palm. He got his sport coat, shook the dust out of it, and afterward straightened his tie. He didn't have a comb within reach. He hadn't thought that far ahead. So he smoothed the top and sides of his head with his hand. He caught sight of his face in the mirror and the dark wood finish of his skin. The skin was moist and glistened in the blinking neon of the vacancy sign. Good Lord, he'd been sweating in the heat all day. They might think he was a common laborer. He felt his pockets for a handkerchief. He took it and wiped the shine off his nose, off his cheeks and chin, and mopped the sweat from his forehead. It was not his best presentation, but it would have to do. When he got out of the car, he dusted his coat sleeves and checked for wrinkles again. He stood up as if there were a brace strapped to his back. Then he walked up to the front desk for a room. At reception, he took a deep breath and put on the most charming rendition of himself. "I'd like to get a room for the night, please," he said. The man looked flustered. "Oh, my goodness," the man at the front desk said. "We forgot to turn off the vacancy sign." Robert tried to hide his disappointment. "Oh, thank you," Robert said. He climbed back into the car and drove away from the motel and the vacancy sign that continued to blink. He had been in the South long enough to know when he had been lied to, but there were plenty of motels on the road, and it didn't matter what one man thought of him. He wasn't thinking rights and equality. "I thought a bed and a shower and something to eat," he would say years later. He drove to the next motel in the row, 100 or so yards away. "I'd like to get a motel room," he said, stiffer than before. He was cautious now, and the man must have seen his caution. "I'm sorry," the man said, polite and businesslike. "We just rented our last room." Robert looked into the face, tried to read it. He noticed that the face was awkward, trying to be loose and matter-of-fact, all calm and uncomfortable. He thanked the man anyway, tried to prove himself even in rejection. "Usually when we try to fit in, we're above them," Robert thought to himself, sad and indignant at the same time. "If we're going to be nice, we're nicer than they would be to each other." Knowing that wasn't helping him now. He was getting anxious. The pulse was racing. He was agitated, sweating on a cool desert night. He went to a third motel and was sweetly rejected a third time. It was fully night now, the sky black and dense. He should have been in bed hours ago. His was the only car on the road now. The motel lots were quiet and still. The lamplights on bedside tables were clicking off. That young couple in the Cadillac all situated now. The road was getting darker, lonelier, as the world settled in for the night. Anybody looking for a room had one by now. Any leftover rooms would go empty, and still they were turning him away. He replayed the rejections in his mind as he drove the few yards to the next motel. Maybe he hadn't explained himself well enough. Maybe it wasn't clear how far he had driven. Maybe he should let them know he saw through them, after all those years in the South. He always prepared a script when he spoke to a white person. Now he debated with himself as to what he should say. He didn't want to make a case of it. He never intended to march over Jim Crow or try to integrate anybody's motel. He didn't like being where he wasn't wanted, and yet here he was, needing something he couldn't have. He debated whether he should speak his mind, protect himself from rejection, say it before they could say it. He approached the next exchange as if it were a job interview. Years later, he would practically refer to it as such. He rehearsed his delivery and tightened his lines. "It would have been opening night jitters if it was theater," he would later say. He pulled into the lot. There was nobody out there but him, and he was the only one driving up to get a room. He walked inside. His voice was about to break as he made his case. "I'm looking for a room," he began. "Now, if it's your policy not to rent to colored people, let me know now so I don't keep getting insulted." A white woman in her 50s stood on the other side of the front desk. She had a kind face, and he found it reassuring, and so he continued. "It's a shame that they would do a person like this," he said. "I'm no robber. I've got no weapons. I'm not a thief. I'm a medical doctor. I'm a captain that just left Austria, which was Salzburg, and the German army was just outside of Vienna. If there had been a conflict, I would have been protecting you. I would not do people the way I've been treated here." It was the most he'd gotten to say all night, and so he went on with his delivery more determinedly than before. "I have money to pay for my services," he said. "Now, if you don't rent to colored people, let me know so I can go on to California. This is inhuman. I'm a menace to anybody driving. I'm a menace to myself and to the public, driving as tired as I am." She listened, and she let him make his case. She didn't talk about mistaken vacancy signs or just rented rooms. She didn't cut him off. She listened, and that gave him hope. "1 minute, Doctor," she said, turning and heading toward a back office. His heart raced as he watched her walk to the back. He could see her consulting with a man through the glass window facing the front desk, deciding in that instant his fate and his worth. They discussed it for some time and came out together. The husband did the talking. He had a kind, sad face. Robert held his breath. "We're from Illinois," the husband said. "We don't share the opinion of the people in this area, but if we take you in, the rest of the motel owners will ostracize us. We just can't do it, I'm sorry." By now, if they had agreed to it, Robert would have been willing to check out before dawn, before anybody could see him, if that's what it took. It was a long shot, but some white proprietors had been known to sneak a colored traveler in on occasion, harbor them like a fugitive or a runaway slave, so long as he was out before the neighbors got wind of it. Robert would have accepted that even if he didn't like it. In his delirium, he imagined the exchange between husband and wife in the back office minutes before, the woman arguing his case, the husband skeptical, wary. "Nobody'll see him anyway," the wife's whispering. "Yes, they will," the husband's responding. "How will they know? Somebody might see him when he drives out of here, or somebody might see his car. Where he's been before, the people that turned him down, they'd know we let him stay here." And so the answer was no. Robert thanked them anyway, especially the woman. If it had been up to her, he would have had the room. "I believe that with everything that's in me," Robert said when he was older and grayer. "This thing I've analyzed 3,000 times. Somehow Robert made it back to the car. He was in the middle of the desert and too tired to go on and too far along not to keep going. His mind took him back to Monroe, to the going-away party they gave him just a few nights ago. His own words rose up and laughed at him. "How in the world can you stay here in this Jim Crow situation? Come go to heaven with me, to California." He drove erratic in the direction of the road, and thus California, although he was nowhere near California, and saw the lights of a filling station. He needed gas, and could use some coffee if he was to make it through the desert and the night. He drove into the station and stopped at a pump. The owner, a middle-aged white man, came right out. "May I help you?" Robert couldn't answer. The man repeated himself. "Hey, fella, what's wrong? What's the matter? Are you sick?" "No," Robert said, unable to manage much more. The man sensed something. He put his hand on Robert's shoulder, and Robert tried to tell him what had happened. The man shook his head as if he understood. Something in the voice, in the way the man looked into his eyes and touched his shoulder and tried in the middle of a cool desert night to console him, made Robert feel all the sadder. It confirmed he wasn't crazy, and that made him feel utterly alone. Yes, there was an evil in the air, and this man knew it, and the woman at the motel knew it, but here he was without a room, and nobody of a mind to do anything had done a single thing to change that fact, and that made the pain harder, not easier to bear. Robert broke down. The exhaustion, the rejection, the unwinding of his dreams in a matter of minutes, it all caught up with him at once. He had driven more than 1,500 miles, and things were no different. In fact, it felt worse because this wasn't the South. It wasn't even close to the South. He sat, unable to speak for longer than is comfortable in front of a total stranger. His voice cracked as the story tumbled out of him. "I came all this way running from Jim Crow, and it slaps me straight in the face," Robert said. "And just think, I told my friends, why did they stay in the South and take the crumbs? Come to California." The man listened with the helplessness of the well-intentioned and tried to cheer him up. "Come on, let me get you a cup of coffee. Where are you going, anyway?" "Los Angeles." "Well, I went to USC, and I hate to disappoint you, but Los Angeles ain't the oasis you think it is." Robert was feeling sick now. It was too late to turn back, and who knew what he was heading into? The man told him to gear himself up. The man didn't use the term, and nobody had bothered to tell Robert ahead of time, but some colored people who had made the journey called it James Crow in California. "You will see it, and it'll hit where it hurts," the man said. "What are you in?" "I'm a doctor." "Well, you're going to find it in the hospitals going to work." Robert was thinking fast, reconsidering, weighing, and waking up. The dream looked to be over before he could even get to California. The man brought him a cup of coffee and filled his tank. Robert got back on the highway and drove into the black hole of night. Soon he came to a fork in the road and saw a sign that made his heart sink. Los Angeles, 380 miles. San Diego, 345 miles. He knew he couldn't drive a mile farther than necessary in this condition, and so San Diego it would be. "I could just see numbers in my mind now," he said many years later. "Los Angeles this way and San Diego that way, and the number was far less distance, and I chose that." In the absolute darkness he found himself in, he could not see the will of the road. He went on faith that he was not driving off into a ravine. Every cell wanted sleep. He bit his tongue to keep his eyelids from sneaking shut. He sang anything to keep his mind from turning in for the night. Now, when he needed the radio, there was no radio, just a crackle of white noise from someplace far away. Suddenly, somewhere around Gila Bend, the road got mean, turned without warning, a sharp left, then a sharper, uglier right, back and forth, and all over again. The car tilted upward, gaining elevation, and resisting the climb as any car would. It forced him into an alertness his body wasn't prepared for, and that he hadn't anticipated. The road shot more curves at him, one right after the other, so that he was going north and south as much as west, and he had to slow down to absorb the blind hooks and horseshoes coming at him. He knew he wasn't the best driver in the world, hadn't done that much of it really, and so he would have to brake to a crawl if he was going to make it. Before, it hadn't mattered much that this was a 2-lane road with no reflector lights and no guardrails to catch him. Now it did. Interstate highways didn't exist yet. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the president who would go on to build them, had only recently taken office. Of course, Robert didn't know that, and knowing it wouldn't have helped him. The mountains closed in on him. He couldn't make out the earth from the sky. The sky was black, the road was black. He could see the black shape of saguaro cactus standing helpless as he passed. He drove into the cave of night, more alone now than ever. It got to the point where he could go no further, and he pulled over to the side of the road. He unfolded himself from behind the wheel and caught an hour of half-sleep. He would have to stop again 2 or 3 times that night. Each time, it left him not much more refreshed than before. He had no choice but to start the engine and take up the task again. He wound through rock canyons and crossed Fortune Wash near the Gila River. A film stuck to his skin and to his wrinkled shirt and trousers. He had not had a chance to wash yesterday off. He opened the windows and vents to get air. Another hour passed, and ahead was a valley, a black velvet plain with diamonds on it. It was the city of Yuma. He saw motel signs with amusing desert names. He gave them no thought. He knew better now. Soon he came upon the Colorado River. A road sign said he had reached the California line, but he was too beat down now to pay it much attention. His back pinched from days and nights of driving. His fingers were sore from clutching the steering wheel. His wrists ached, and still there was more road. The road would not end. Just past Felicity came the warnings of the desert. Check your radiator. Last chance for water. Last chance for gas stations. Strong winds possible. What was this place he was going to? What was he doing behind the wheel in the middle of the pitch-black desert by himself? Could it be worth all this? It had seemed so clear back in Monroe. Now he fought with himself over the fear and the doubt. He couldn't bear to hear the I told you so's. If he turned back now, if he changed his mind or lost his nerve, the I knew it's would ring in his ear. Dr. Clement would be the first to say it. He was dreading the place already. But there was no turning back, he would say years later. I had to get here. I had to try. He blinked at oncoming headlights, willing himself awake. Orion stretched over the highway and made an arc across the sky. It filled the windshield and stayed with him until the sun came back. Near the Tecate Divide, the pink light of morning came in from behind. He was in San Diego County. Another 50 miles to the coast. The sun was on his back as he pulled away for good from the south and the center of gravity. On the Illinois Central, at the Illinois border, October 1937. Ida Mae Brandon Gladney. In the dark hours of the morning, Ida Mae and her family crossed the Mason-Dixon line at the Ohio River, the border between Kentucky and Illinois, between the provincial South and the modern North, between servitude and freedom, without comment. The black night pressed against the windows and looked no different in the New World than in the Old. It was as thick and black in Illinois as it was in Kentucky or Tennessee. From the railcar window, the land looked to be indistinguishable, one state from another, just one big flat plain, and there was nothing in nature that one could see that said colored people should be treated one way on one side of the river and a different way on the other. Crossing the line was a thing of spiritual and political significance to the guardians of Southern law and to colored people escaping it who knew they were crossing over. But going north, most migrants would have been asleep or unable to see whatever the line looked like if they even knew where it was. On the red-eye going north, the railroad would not likely have disrupted the entire train just so colored people could sit with white people now that they legally could. Ida Mae had no memory of such a commotion in any case, only that they'd made it out of Mississippi. They crossed into Illinois at Cairo and passed through Carbondale and Centralia, then Champaign, Kankakee, Peatone, Madison, Grand Crossing, Woodlawn, Hyde Park, Oakland, 22nd Street, 12th Street Station, Chicago. They would have to change trains yet again to continue on to Milwaukee, where Ida Mae's sister Irene lived, and where they could set about finding work to sustain them in the new world. On the Silver Meteor, Northern New Jersey, April 15th, 1945. George Swanson Starling. At daybreak, the Silver Meteor wound its way into Pennsylvania Station at Newark, New Jersey. The conductor called out the name of the station and the city, and after so long a ride through the night and now into day, some passengers from the south gathered their things and stepped off the train, weary and anxious to start their new lives and relieved to have made it to their destination at last. Newark? It sounded so tantalizingly close to New York, and maybe some assumed was the way Northerners, clipping their words as they did, pronounced New York. It was confusing to have their intended destination preceded directly by a city with such a similar name and with an identically named station. And as they had been riding for as many as 24 hours and were nervous about missing their stop, some got off prematurely, and it is said that is how Newark gained a good portion of its black population, those arriving in Newark by accident and deciding to stay. George Starling knew better. He had been to New York before, just not on the train. He remained in his seat until he arrived at the real New York, where the aunts who had sent money to his grandmother, the root doctor, to help raise him and his cousins, were waiting for him at their Harlem doorsteps. San Diego County, April 1953. Robert Joseph Pershing Foster. It was early in San Diego. Robert Foster could see the concrete skyline and the headlights of a city waking up. He drew closer to the heart of town. Trolley cars clanked past the palm trees on C Street. The Pacific Ocean was up ahead. He was finally on the other side of the desert. He was hours from Los Angeles, but well into California, the end of the line when it came to the migration. It was more a relief now than a wonder. His eyes scanned the pedestrians for pigment. He stopped at the curb and flagged down the first colored person he saw. He had not talked to a soul during his night in the desert. This would be the first encounter in this new adopted land. His heart sank as he uttered the words that seemed an admission of failure. "Pardon me," he said edgily to the man. "Where can you find a colored hotel?" "What do you mean, a colored hotel?" the man said with the casual annoyance of an urbanite interrupted by a tourist. "I can tell you where a hotel is. There's a hotel right there." "No, I don't want that," Robert said. "Just tell me where most of the colored folks stay." Robert was too tired to argue. 3 states without sleep. He had a stubble of beard on his face that he would otherwise never be seen in public with. He could not bear rejection again. "I could not," he began, still searching for the right words decades later. "The thought, it was overwhelming, of me being turned down again. I couldn't do that." Robert repeated himself to the man. The man assured him he didn't have to stay in a place like that in San Diego, but gave him the name of a small, featureless hotel anyway, a place for colored people, since he was so insistent on that. Robert found the place. He slept and showered and shaved for the first time since New Mexico. When he opened his eyes hours later, there he was in a segregated hotel. A week on the road, and he was in the exact same place, it seemed, that he left. Later in the day, he headed north past the Joshua trees. Los Angeles was another 121 miles from San Diego. He didn't know which city would be the right one for him, Los Angeles or Oakland, or where he would work, or how he would set up a practice wherever he ended up. He had just come out of the desert in every sense of the word, and the details of his future were too much to think about right now. He drove north toward whatever awaited him. Billboards popped up on both sides of the highway. They whizzed past him as he drove. They had women in rouge and lipstick, and men with stingy brim hats, with the cord above the brim selling lager beer and cigarettes. The people in the billboards were smiling and happy. They looked out onto the highway and straight into the cars. They kept him company, and although they weren't talking to him, he told himself they were. "I played a game that it was for me," he later said. Soon one billboard stood out from the others. "It's lucky when you're in California," it said cheerfully. It was hawking lucky lager beer to every car that passed. Robert repeated those words in his mind. "It's going to be lucky for me in California. It's going to be good." It had to be. He said it over and over to himself, until he actually started to believe it. The South, 1915 to 1975. From the moment the first migrants stepped off the earliest trains, the observers of the Great Migration debated what made millions of rural and small-town people turn their backs on all they knew, leave the land where their fathers were buried, and jump off a cliff into the unknown. Planters blamed northern recruiters, who were getting paid $1 a head to deliver colored labor to the foundries and slaughterhouses of the North. But that only held for the earliest recruits, usually young men, field hands, with nothing to lose. Others said the Chicago Defender seduced them, but they could only be seduced if there was some passion already deep within them. Economists said it was the boll weevil that tore through the cotton fields and left them without work and in even greater misery, which likely gave hard-bitten sharecroppers just one more reason to go. Still, many of them picked cotton not by choice, but because it was the only work allowed them in the cotton-growing states. In South Carolina, colored people had to apply for a permit to do any work other than agriculture after Reconstruction. It would not likely have been their choice had there been an alternative. And besides, many of the migrants, people like George Starling and Robert Foster and many thousands more, came from southern towns where they did not pick cotton, or from states less dependent on it, and thus would have made their decisions with no thought of the boll weevil or the pressure on cotton prices. The Chicago Commission on Race Relations, an investigative body created after the World War I wave of migration, decided to ask migrants why they had left. A few of their responses were these. Some of my people were here, persuaded by friends, for better wages, to better my conditions, better living, more work, came on visit and stayed. Wife persuaded me, tired of the South, to get away from the South. The earliest departures were merely the first step in a divorce that would take more than half a century to complete. At the time, it was misunderstood as a temporary consequence of war and declared over when the war ended. But the people who before had been cut off from the North now had the names of neighbors and relatives actually living there. Instead of the weakening stream that observers predicted, the Great Migration actually gathered steam after World War I. It continued into the 20s with the departure of some 903,000 black Southerners, nearly double the World War I wave. It did not stop in the 30s, when, despite the Depression, 480,000 managed to leave. Among them was Mae Gladney. World War II brought the fastest flow of black people out of the South in history. Nearly 1.6 million left during the 1940s, more than in any decade before. George Starling was one of them. Another 1.4 million followed in the 1950s, when Robert Pershing Foster drove out of Louisiana for good. And another million in the 1960s, when, because of the more barefaced violence during the South's desperate last stand against civil rights, it was actually more treacherous to leave certain isolated precincts of the rural South than perhaps at any time since slavery. The numbers put forward by the census are believed by some historians to be an underestimate. Unknown numbers of migrants who could pass for white melted into the white population once they left and would not be counted in the migration. Colored men, fearful of being extradited back to the South over purported debts or disputes, would have been wary of census takers. And overcrowded tenements with 4 or 5 families packed into kitchenettes, or day workers rotating their use of a bed, would have been hard to accurately account for in the best of circumstances. A large error in enumerating Southern blacks who went north, wrote the historian Florette Henry, was not only probable, but inescapable. The journey north was a defining moment for the people embarking upon it. Many years later, most everyone would remember how they chose where they went, the name of the train they took, and whom they went to stay with. Some would remember the exact day they departed and the places the train stopped on the way to wherever they were going. A man named Robert Fields, who as a teenager hid in the freight cars to flee Yazoo City, Mississippi, remembered arriving in Chicago on the day Rudolph Valentino died, which would make it August 23, 1926, because the news of Valentino's death was on the front page of every newspaper and was all anyone was talking about that day. Robert Pershing Foster would remember leaving right after Easter, which, unbeknownst to him, was a popular time to leave. Given a choice, Southerners preferred not to go north-facing winter, and leaving at Easter gave them plenty of time to adjust to the north before the cold set in. George Starling would remember that he left Florida on April 14, 1945, as if it were his birthday, which, in a way, it was. Decades after she left, Mae Gladney would remember that they got the cotton clean out of the field before they left, which would make it mid to late October, and that she was pregnant with her youngest child but not yet showing, which would make it 1937. Well after Ida Mae, George, and Robert made their way out of the South, a man by the name of Eddie Irvin would always remember how he left, because he went to such great lengths to escape the Mississippi Delta. It was the spring of 1963. Many of the observers and participants of the first wave of the migration had passed away, having concluded that the phenomenon was long over. They would not have imagined that someone like Irvin might have a harder time leaving than many before him. But in the early 1960s, secluded regions of the rural South, Alabama and Mississippi in particular, had become war zones in the final confrontation between segregationists and the civil rights movement. Spies and traitors were everywhere, the violence raw and without apology, the segregationists standing more bold-faced, clamping down harder as outsiders tried to force integration on them. No one was exempt, not well-to-do white Northerners like Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, not upstanding family men like Medgar Evers, or even 4 little middle-class girls in church on a Sunday morning in Birmingham in 1963. Irvin's story is evidence of just how long the Great Migration stretched across a hard century, how universal were the impulses of those who left, and how treacherous it could be to try to leave certain remote and Victorian pockets of the American South throughout the 60-odd years the Great Migration lasted. Eddie Irvin was 20 in the spring of 1963. He was a day picker at a plantation in Scotts, Mississippi, walking with pieces of cardboard tied to his one pair of shoes to cover the bottoms of his feet. "We were still in slavery like," he would say years later. He started picking when he was 5 and chopping weeds off the cotton at 6. And when he was 7 or 8, a boy named Charles Parker was skinned alive for opening a door for a white woman and speaking to her in a way she didn't like, as the grown folks told it. Eddie would never forget that. He picked because he had to, and crawled on his knees to cut spinach because spinach is low to the ground. He got 10 cents for a 50-pound basket of spinach. He could pick only 2 or 3 baskets a day because spinach is light. One day when he was out cutting spinach, he sliced into his finger but was afraid to leave the field. It was 6 miles to the doctor in town. He worked 2 more days, and on the 3rd day decided to walk to town to see the doctor. The boss man passed him on his way back to the field and jumped out of his truck. "Don't you know you don't go nowhere unless I tell you to?" the boss man said. He pulled a Winchester rifle out of the truck. "Maybe I ought to kill you right now," he said. The man put the rifle to Eddie's head. "You don't go nowhere unless I tell you to go," he told him. Eddie was 17. He decided that somehow or other he would find a way out. When he was 20, he made his plans. A bus ticket to Chicago was $21 as he remembered it, It took him 6 or 7 months to save up for it. But that was the easy part. Now he had to find out how to use it without calling attention to himself in that little town where everybody knew everybody, and it seemed everyone was watching. There was a bus that stopped near him, but he couldn't catch that bus or inquire about it. "Everybody knew what you'd be trying to do if you caught that bus," he said. "And you had to walk 6 miles to get to it." There was another little bus stop in a town nearby. It did not post the bus schedule, and he was not in a position to ask. "They didn't tell you the schedule," he would say years later. "A lot of things you'd want to know. You couldn't ask." So he went to the station at different times of the day. Each time, he sat and waited for the bus to leave, and when it belched out of the depot, he looked at the station clock and made a note of it. Sometimes the bus left early, he found. Sometimes it left late. He tried to get an average time so he would not miss it on the day he wanted to go. That was how he learned the bus schedule. "We had been checking for months," he said. He decided to leave in May 1963 and take his sister and her 2 children with him. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing. "You didn't talk about it or tell nobody," he said. "You had to sneak away." That day, he acted as if it were any other day. He went up to a man named Eason and casually asked him if he could give them a ride. "We going to Greenville today," he told Eason. "Could you take us?" He didn't tell Eason he was leaving Mississippi for good, or that he needed to catch a bus pulling out at a certain time, or that this was the moment of truth, after planning this in his mind for most of his short adult life. The man might not have taken them if he knew, so Eddie kept it to himself. The 4 of them got in the car with nothing but a few clothes in a paper bag. When they got to Greenville, they paid the man $3 or $4. Eason figured out what they were up to when he saw where they wanted to be dropped off. "What do you call yourself doing?" he asked them. "We getting out of town," Eddie said. The man got scared himself after that. Eddie and his sister and her 2 kids got on the bus, and before anybody knew it, they were out of the county with everything they had in a shopping bag wrapped in a rope of seagrass. They sat in the back and kept their mouths shut. "The white folks could talk," he would say years later. "You sit and be quiet. Where we came from, we didn't move from the back. We just sat there. We weren't the type to move around. We wasn't sure we could move, so we didn't move." That fear. He had learned that fear when he was little and once passed the white people's church. The kids came out of the church when they saw him. They threw rocks and bricks and called him the vilest names that could spring from a southern tongue. And he asked his grandparents what kind of God they got up inside that church. He was getting away from all that now. He looked out at the lights and the billboards. The driver announced that they were passing out of Mississippi and into Tennessee. He was out for sure now, and on his way to Illinois, and at that moment he could feel the sacks of cotton dropping from his back. Years later he would still tremble at the memory and put into words the sentiments of generations who went in search of a kinder mistress. "It was like getting unstuck from a magnet," he said.
Context of White Supremacy. The number to dial is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you have questions, comments, would like to participate. Number one more time, 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. press *6 if you would like to participate. For folks who have, I guess, lots of ways to participate now. If you have an iPhone, you can go to the C.O.W.S page on the Black Talk Radio Network. There is an app that you can download for your iPhone. It's free. Just download the app, and you should be able to participate. You can listen to the program, and you can call in. Just download the app. And if you have a smartphone, Android app for that as well, just click the link. It should be in green letters on the page. If you want to download it for your iPhone or your smartphone, iPhone, whatever the case may be, just pick the app that you need, click that link, download it, and it's the same procedure as if you're using the Flash phone. There's also a button on the Black Talk Radio page for that. You can click the button. I think it says call the show or talk to the show, whatever. It's very obvious. Can't miss it. Click that button. It'll open up a small window. If you're not on the Black Talk Radio page, very easy. You can just use the URL, which is tiny.cc/1race, and that is the number 1. So it's tiny, TINY.cc/1race. Whether you use the URL, whether you click the button, or whether you use the app, the procedure is the same. Once you open up the little window, if you use the app, the URL, the button, whatever, it'll open up a window. It will ask you on the first line for the number, which is 760-569-7676. On the second line, it will ask for the code, which is 564-943. The third line, it will ask for a name. You can leave it blank. You can put in a nickname, whatever. Once you're done, just click the green button at the bottom, call the show, bang, you'll be dialed in. You can listen. If you'd like to participate, just press *6 and we can get you on the line as well. It is not as complicated as it sounds. 21st century, use your iPhone all day and tablets and all that other stuff. It's not that difficult if you would like to participate. We'll hit the phone line. I'll reserve comments until later. One thing I will say, I read Essence magazine, the September issue for this year. Isabel Wilkerson, she has an article. She's actually doing an interview with Dr. David Williams. He is a black male. He's at Harvard University. And they have a pretty lengthy report on racism. And they're talking about anti-blackness. White people being anti-black and black people being anti-black, and they conclude the report by giving suggestions on things that non-white people can try to do to maintain some semblance of mental health under all of the strain of white terrorism. But that's in this month's edition of Essence. I would have linked it, but I have not been able to find an actual link for this article online. But if you get the magazine, you should be able to go to the library, or if you have a subscription or whatever, look for that article. It was actually on the front page of Essence magazine where they're talking about racism. Front page, Isabel Wilkerson. Hitting the phone lines. Folks that dialed in, we should have, I think this is B. Moore, Mr. Demery 4, and the person that dialed in on the free HD line, your 3 lines should be open. I guess we'll start with our female caller, B. Moore. If you want to share, feel free.
Peace, can I be heard clearly?
If you speak up a little bit, we should be able to hear you fine.
Okay, hold on. Peace, can I be heard now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, peace, Gus, and all the other listeners. Hope everyone is as well as can be under the system of white supremacy. The first thing that I took notes on was something you already touched on, how Jules, the non-white boy whose family could pass, how he was described like chattel, like property, a thing rather than a person. I took note on that because, I mean, as we've already been saying, like the Jim Crow and even just then and now is just like formal slavery. And then the way that said it affected him even years later, I definitely understand why it affected him. And then I don't think it was Pershing, but I'm not sure. He was going to California and he was denied several times a hotel room. Just the fact that he was trying to straighten the wrinkle out of his clothes, wipe his face off, and make himself presentable, and he was still getting denied. I took note of that. And then the fact that he believed that the white female would have let him stay had the husband not had a say. I was just thinking that that particular instance shows our confusion about white women and their role in racism and white supremacy. Because I feel like, if the white woman had, I don't know, I feel like he shouldn't have thought that he would have been able to stay had it been for just the white female. I took note that they keep referring to these places they're migrating to as quote-unquote heaven and freedom and all these other positive words until they get there. And like he said, they get slapped in the face with racism. It doesn't end because he moved somewhere else. It's global. I also took note of how they talked about non-white people having to obtain a permit to work or do anything, and I feel like that still applies to this day. A particular example I had, I have two. I used to do this African dance class, and the drummers were saying that you have to be certified, and you have to have a piece of paper to drum now. So that's one example. And then back home, my aunt, she used to sell food on the weekends, like fish sandwiches or whatever, and she had to stop because she didn't have a permit to sell food. And so I was just thinking, with that, white people have to tax and have a say-so in everything. And then the last thing I took notes on is the non-white male that was skinned alive for opening a door for a white woman and talking to her like I assumed they were equal. I was just thinking he should have left the door closed in her face. But then again, that probably wouldn't have solved the problem either. She probably would have still been skinned alive for letting it hit her. So you win some, you lose some, lose-lose situation under the system of white supremacy. And that's all for now.
Right on, be more. I make every effort to not open doors for any white people, white women, white children, white men, no white people. If I do open the door and I'm going through, I make sure that I do not hold it for them if they are coming in behind me. We should have Demery 4, and the person that dialed in on the free HD line, your line should be open as well.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings, Gus. Greetings to the other callers and the listening audience. First, I'd like to say that excellent book, and with the three characters, I think that the author is given a glimpse of the African-American experience in America. I think that I will start to give Ida Mae a break because as I get to know the characters, she's come through quite a bit, and anyone that can come all the way from wearing croaker sacks, made in the dresses, flower sacks, hemmed together, old clothes, probably had no makeup. I'm starting to gain a little bit of respect for her, as a matter of fact. But I'll begin with Pershing, still in a state of denial, I think. Although he had traveled a great distance from the South, he had been past Texas and was well beyond New Mexico. He thought about being free like a regular American. Whatever that meant in his mind. But the same state of mind we've all been in at one time or another before we discovered that we're in a system of white supremacy. at the end of the paragraph and crossing over, the South is mentioned as the center of gravity. I thought was interesting because when you think about the center of gravity is the point at which the entire weight of a body or mass is supported. At the point, the body would remain in equilibrium. So I thought that was fitting that the South would be called the center of gravity. Pershing, after being turned down 2 or 3 times, trying to find a room, after brushing off his clothes, slicking down his hair, trying to look a little better, he found that it doesn't matter how you dress or what your social status is. Those of us that are relegated to the lowest rung of the social ladder, we are niggers, niggerized by the system of white supremacy. The couple that would not allow Percy to rent the room for the night remind me of the anti-racist whites that say that they don't share the opinion of most other whites, but continue to practice racism, white supremacy anyway. The author referred to jumping off the cliff into the unknown, and we do that as non-whites every time we attempt to do something constructive. I will reserve the rest of my comments for later. Give someone else a chance. Thanks for taking my call.
Miracles never cease. Softening on Mae Gladney. Wow. Person that dialed in on the free HD line, did you have commentary?
Yes, I do, Gus. Greetings to you and greetings to the other listeners. Am I coming through?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I was just getting caught up with the book club, and so I finally got caught up today. And one of the things that I was going to mention, you were mentioning the child Jules, whose grandfather had to take him in because he did not meet up to the standards of the other family members. He was darker, and I find it's very, I wouldn't say coincidental. I would say it seems kind of poetic that he's named Jules, and he's the darker of the other members, and we all know that jewels are normally darker in coloration. The gems are darker in color. So it seems that they were kind of, I don't know if that's his real name, but it seems kind of psychotic the way he's named and how he sticks out from all of the others that he cannot pass, like all of his other family members, and the damage that was done to him during this incident when he knew for a fact that he was being hidden and smuggled into this hotel, because if they knew what he looked like, he would not have been, the family would have been denied room for that night. One thing that I took from the reading of last week was on Ida Mae and her family when they were traveling on their way to Chicago. It seemed that they went to some extraordinary trouble, that they had to do the coupling and uncoupling of the colored cars on the train. And because once you cross the Jim Crow line, they said that you could not have the segregated cars. You had to uncouple them, and you had to go into everybody had to be put together into the regular train cars. And then once you come back into the Jim Crow section, and you have to go back into the train yards, hooked up these cars again. Everybody had to go play musical chairs, get back into their respective compartments. And it seems that it was so chaotic and so idiotic that these white people went to such length in order to separate blacks and white at such hardship. And not only that, it showed that, the train cars for the black passengers, they were put where all the soot was coming off the caboose, where in the event of a crash, they would be the ones to take all of the impact. Their cars was sitting right up there with the luggage, so there is no chance for them ever surviving because they were giving the absolute worst, and yet still they had to pay the same train fare as all of the other passengers on these trains. And it just goes to show once again that the things that we went through in this country, and when people always want to say that black people, white, that we haven't done better, why we can't do ourselves, listening to this story, it just makes me so sad and so angry when I think of and this was less than like 50 years ago when this was going on, less than 50 years, to show what our ancestors had to go through in order to navigate their way around the country. And Pershing and what he did in his trips going across the U.S., I know for a personal experience that myself, husband, and children, we made that trip coming from Northern California to Louisiana. We did that trip 3 times. So I know the heart, and we did it in the 80s. Then it had the interstates and it had the hotels, and it took us 3 days to cross from Northern California to come up to Louisiana. So I could imagine what he had to go through traveling in those times and days by himself in order to navigate that perilous journey, because it is no fun to cross. Texas alone took us a day and a half just to come across Texas. So he managed to do that without any sleep and sitting behind the wheels of that car. We just have to know that all the ancestors was behind him, keep him and giving him safe passage for him to make it to California. And I'll stop right there and let others get a chance to get in, because it just gave me nightmares when I was listening to this man, because I knew what it was like. We came up that way, coming across the country to get to Louisiana, where my husband people are from. So it was no picnic, and I feel for Mr. Pershing and what he had to go through.
Ashe. I have done that cross-country trek driving a couple times. I've done Atlanta to Oakland, and man, I can only tell you, I do not think I would have done that had it been 1960s, 70s, 50s. Even when we did it in the 2000s, I was still kind of like, man, we're supposed to be going through Mississippi and Louisiana, Texas, all that. Like, man, I unless you've done it, I cannot even imagine rewinding to a time when, if you are a black person, you could have been killed for no reason at all. And so what? There would have been no search party, no T-shirts. Nobody would have made a song for you. Like, oh, well, that would have just been that. You would have been one of those cars on the side of the road, like Pershing mentioned, I think, in last week's session. The book is so well written. I think that's been said, but I don't think that can be overstated as we move through this massive volume. It's so well written, particularly the section on Dr. Pershing this week, Robert Pershing Foster, when he is being denied and denied and denied. And I'd said, let's kind of keep this in mind as we read, when he keeps talking about California, come on and go to heaven with me. Like, let's keep that in mind when he gets out there. If he thinks there's not going to be any racism, I want to get the other call. I'll save my comment. I'll just read the quote that I had when he was stopping before he kind of got really dejected about being rejected and denied getting lodging. When he says he saw one of these white people, well-intentioned white people, and he said that gave him a little bit of hope. I remembered that line from The Matrix. I think it's infamous now, the line from The Architect, where he says, hope, it is the quintessential human delusion, simultaneously the source of your greatest strength and your greatest weakness. That was what I thought of when he mentioned the word hope. I think last year she referenced Dr. Ani's work, where she calls that a part of the rhetorical ethic, having this hope that there will be a benevolent, not racist white person. I think that is one of the most crippling, toxic concepts in the universe, the idea of a good, well-intentioned white person. but I'll stop there. The person that called in from a block number, did you have commentary?
Yeah, this is Peaches.
Speak up, please. Speak up, please.
Yeah, this is Peaches. I was calling to talk about something that the authors said on C-SPAN, and it's funny because before she said it, it's like I almost knew she was going to say this. She said that in the South, during Jim Crow, if a black person was driving, they were not allowed to drive ahead of a white person that was driving next to them. No matter if the white person was going like 5 miles an hour, you cannot have gone faster. And it's funny because, well, I myself, I don't drive, but I've been with friends that have driven, and I would be on the highway, and all of a sudden, they start driving real fast, and I'm like, "What's up?" I said, "Why are you driving so fast?" And they said, "Because that white guy over there, he wants to pass me up, and I'm not going to let him do that." And I said, "Why does he want to pass you up?" I said, maybe he's late for work." And they said, "No, he's not late for work. He just doesn't want a black person to be in front of him." And I'm like, that is so childish. And so, when she told me, when she said that on C-SPAN, I was just, really, I was amazed that she was going to say that, but, at the same time, I wasn't surprised. I'm like, racism is just so stupid, I mean, just the whole practice of it is it's just stupid. And that's all I want to say.
I heard her give a talk. I've heard her do several now, but she was speaking about that specifically, how all these rules that they had at that time where black people couldn't pass white motorists. And she was trying to explain it to some high school students, and it was not sinking in. Like they were saying, "Oh, well, I would have done this," or "Oh, I would have done." She was like, "No, you're not getting it." Like they could have called the police. You could have died for passing a white person on the road. Like it took a lot of words to sink in to these young people that she was talking to. I'm sure there were some white people present, but they just could not grasp what she was trying to explain to them. And it reminded me, I think someone called in before and they were talking about how they were just entering a building, going through a door, and the white person, it became a contest. Like the white person had to beat them and get through the door first. Everything is a race for the white race. Everything. Got to get through the door. Anything. If we're taking a test, if we're driving, anything has got to be, I'm supposed to beat this black person. We're supposed to beat these niggers at all times. We're always supposed to be in charge. Whatever it is, it's a competition. Even if we're just walking down the sidewalk, I'm supposed to get to the end of the sidewalk before this nigger does. That's the way that they approach everything. It's just, that's the white brain computer. I don't think we understand that at all. I wanted to backtrack to that passage really quick, just so that, I think it's incredibly well written and it's so poignant. I wanted to backtrack a little bit to that passage, and then if anyone has anything else they want to share before we get to the second audio clip, we should have time for that too. But this is Dr. Robert Pershing Foster after he's been rejected, and the nice white woman that gave him a little bit of hope, and they still turn him away, and he's processed all that, and now he's at the gas station just shocked, shell-shocked it seems. He's on the battlefield of racism, white supremacy, and he's shell-shocked. And Isabel Wilkerson, she writes that this middle-aged white man comes out and asks if he can help Dr. Pershing Foster, and he says, "The man sensed something. He put his hand on Robert's shoulder, and Robert tried to tell him what had happened. The man shook his head as if he understood. Something in the voice, in the way the man looked into his eyes and touched his shoulder and tried in the middle of a cool desert night to console him, made Robert feel all the sadder. It confirmed he wasn't crazy, and that made him feel utterly alone. Yes, there was an evil in the air, and this man knew it, and the woman at the motel knew it, but here he was without a room, and nobody of mine to do anything had done a single thing to change that fact. And that made the pain harder, not easier to bear. Robert broke down. The exhaustion, the rejection, the unwinding of his dreams in a matter of minutes. It all caught up with him at once. He had driven more than 1,500 miles, and things were no different. In fact, it felt worse because this wasn't the South. It wasn't even close to the South. He sat unable to speak for longer than is comfortable in front of a total stranger. His voice cracked as the story tumbled out of him. I came all this way, running from Jim Crow, and it slaps me straight in the face, Robert said. And just think, I told my friends, why did they stay in the South and take the crumbs? Come to California. The man listened with the helplessness of the well-intentioned and tried to cheer him up. Come on, let me get you a cup of coffee. Where are you going anyway? Los Angeles. Well, I went to USC, and I hate to disappoint you, but Los Angeles ain't the oasis you think it is. Robert was feeling sick now. It was too late to turn back, and who knew what he was heading into? The man told him to gear himself up. The man didn't use the term, and nobody had bothered to tell Robert ahead of time, but some colored people who had made the journey called it James Crow in California. You will see it, and it'll hit you where it hurts, the man said. What are you in? I'm a doctor. Well, you're going to find it in the hospitals going to work. I will stop there. That passage, right sad. I mean, wow. I had to put my head down for a moment. I guess just thoughts on that, and does that remind you, because we're looking at parallels, right? Things that are 2013. Does this remind you of any incidents or episodes where a black person is kind of putting their head on the shoulder of a racist to be consoled about white terrorism? Does this remind you of that? And any other thoughts anyone has on this passage, which I think is just incredible?
Well,
I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I just say this real quick. I was gonna say, since it was dark, there was nobody around. I wondered the man might have been, trying to get close to him. Might have wanted to have sex or something. I mean, because I've heard of white people doing stuff like that. That freaky stuff when there's nobody around. Just them and another black person, and they pretend to be consoling and all that, just so they can, get close to you, physically. But that's just my opinion.
What it also reminded me of is that story with UCLA Dr. Christian Head, who just won his lawsuit for harassment, sexual discrimination in UCLA in 2013, and he's also a doctor, a very skilled doctor. So it seems that over 50 years, 60 years, because this was back in 53 when Dr. Pershing made that journey, 60-some years later, nothing has changed in California. It's still the same thing. Black doctors are not respected for their skills.
Oh, the doctor in North Carolina. I forgot. That was my reminder. I need to get in contact with him. He did the NPR stuff. 55 miles per hour means you, black boy. I forgot all about that. I'm sorry?
I was saying you took the words out of my mouth. That's what I was thinking about.
Oh, right. I gotta get on that. I needed that reminder. Thank you, family, ancestors, creator. I needed to get on my job about that. I will text him tomorrow. The person at 4028, last four digits 4028. Did you have commentary?
Yeah. I haven't had a chance to listen to some of the recent compensatory call-ins, but because I know you play clips from NPR on them, but there was a clip, I don't know, about maybe a month or so ago, and they were talking about racism today, and there was a clip about black people being shown houses or apartments, and how, of course they weren't shown as many apartments or houses as other people, but they thought that they, were having, they didn't feel discriminated against. So, like, they were having a pleasant experience. And I was thinking about what, was it Percy? Or no. I get names confused. The doctor was going through. when he was making his way to California, about how it wasn't like nigger go home, but it was like a nice smile. I'm sorry, all the rooms are taken, that kind of thing. And I just see that kind of like as the seedlings of like modern quote unquote racism, where where you might feel like you're going crazy for a minute, when there's parallels, but because it's not overt racism and the people who are being racist seem pleasant, you kind of ask yourself, well, maybe I am crazy. Maybe this isn't racism, and I just see those parallels between, what he was experiencing and what we experience today, because I think the hallmark of institutional racism is when you even have to question whether or not it's racism, you're not sure, and that to some extent it might be a pleasant experience. Your interactions with white people, But anyway, that was just my observation.
Absolutely. I think Dr. Pershing said he was, for a moment, thinking that he might be crazy. Any of the other folks on the line have thoughts on that passage or any other sections of the book?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
On that particular passage in the book, it reminds me of the psychological strategy that the police use sometimes, the good cop, bad cop. It seemed like a psychological strategy that the racists use because there's always someone that's pretending to have a lighter, more optimistic or liberal view, like they're coming to the rescue. But if you notice, he didn't actually do anything to help Pershing. So even if you get him a cup of coffee, so what you're telling it's going to be the same way in L.A. when you get there. What can you do about the situation that the man is in at the present? And it also brings up another part of the book. I don't know if, we got there. We covered the part where the author mentioned Goodman and Swarner, two of the teenagers that was murdered in Mississippi, and she failed to mention James Chaney. Well-meaning white people, mentioned at the expense of omitting James Chaney's name. But I did some research. If you would look up Goodman or Swarner, it tells a story about those individuals without mentioning James Chaney. But if you look up James Chaney, their names are always mentioned with his. So I thought that was another interesting point about that. And the part about Charles Parker getting skinned alive for helping a white woman. You always say, don't help white people. It's another example of not helping white people. I mute my line.
That is very profound indeed, what you just mentioned with Cheney. That's why I always make it an effort. Anytime they bring up those three civil rights workers, I always do it in alphabetical order. I always make sure I mention Mr. Cheney's name first, because those two white boys and Viola Luiso, those are the three names, and John Brown, those are the only four white people that black people like to hold up in reverence, and always like to mention them, that they've done so much for black people in our struggle to get our so-called liberation, which we still haven't gotten. but they always like to revere those 4 white people. And I always make it a point of not even mentioning their names if I can help it. But I felt so bad for Mr. Pershing and what he had to do to sit through that long, humiliating drive. And as you said, the good cop, bad cop routine, that here it is, this man had to humble himself, explain himself. Oh, I'm a doctor. I just came back from Europe where I was trying to keep the Nazis from coming over here and taking your liberty. And still, he went through all of that song and dance, and still he was told, no, we don't serve your kind. If we give you a room and, other white folks might see us and then we might be out of a job. So it was like, why even go through all of that routine?
Got about 3-4 minutes left. If anybody has other comments that they would like to get in, if you're listening and you didn't dial in and you had something you wanted to share, if you can't get it in, just write it down, make a note or what have you, and we'll be sure. The people that dialed in, last 4 digits 3366. Your line should be. I guess you can go first since I got your line open, and the other person I'll get you.
Okay, may I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Hello, great show program tonight. Just a couple of things that stuck out to me as I was listening. Listening. On the drive down, I think he was heading towards California and looking for places to stay. And he mentioned that some of the places that they may have to stop in. He said something about, I may lay in the bed tonight with questionable hygiene, and just some of the descriptions of the places that they would have to stay. And and it made me think back to the earlier part of the book when they had to go to the movie theater, going upstairs to the balcony and the smell of urine. And they just kind of go to show you, because they're looking for places to stay. They have to stay with other black people or in other places, and that, the mindset of what's been done to us, this white supremacy, that we won't even keep a place up for our own self. And that kind of stuck out. That really just kind of stuck out with me. Because, and I'll just throw this in, I used to live in Tuskegee, and there was a grocery store there, and we would always complain about how this grocery store was not kept up that well. And I can remember one of the college professors was saying that, you really have to talk about that. So that's even something that carries on still today, because I lived in Tuskegee in the early 2000s. So, that's recently. The other thing that stuck out to me was the boy, something about the church, and he said that they would call him all kind of names. He said he asked somebody, what kind of God or who is that God in that church, and that, makes me think, just because you're in church serving this God, but then you can come out of church and treat and talk to these people, or talk to black people just like they're just lowered and low. And so I can just see where you just would take that. Your God supports what you do. And I just thought that, because that was something that just really stuck out in my mind. And I think that, unfortunately, as I think it was 4-4 said, this stuff isn't that old. I mean, if you're talking about 50 years, I'm in my 50s. So, this stuff is not that old. It's not like we're talking about 100, 200, 300 years ago. We're talking almost like a hop, skip, and a jump from today. It's just not that old. And I think that we can see a lot of some of these behaviors coming back, and coming back very fast.
Mm-hmm. S.Doc, you should be with us as well.
Greetings, everyone. I'll wait for the next interval. I have the baby in the 7. She's yelling loudly.
Oh.
So.
Right on. Fatherly duties, outstanding. We will go ahead and hop to segment number 2 then. That way we should have ample time for everyone to share, and S.Dot can get his word in as well. I guess quickly, Jules, Bruce C. Fine, she reminded me, they say family jewels, a reference to testicles. I was also thinking of Pulp Fiction, because Samuel L. Jackson's character is named Jules as well. See, anything else quick I wanted to throw in before we get to the Next, the religion of white supremacy. That's what that passage, the female caller just mentioned about the church. What God are they serving? They are serving the God of white supremacy, the strongest religion on the planet. We get confused about that frequently and thinking that white people are Christians or Jewish or Catholic or Protestant. If you are a racist, white supremacist, that is your religion. They cross all the T's, dot all the I's in the religion, the gospel of white supremacy. We get confused about that sometimes. I also thought it was pretty interesting, Dr. Pershing Foster, that he said before he went to talk to these white people who ultimately turned him down, that sometimes he would get a script together before he went to talk to white people. I thought that was noteworthy as well, just the importance of getting your words together. When you go to talk with white people, you can't just be running off at the mouth casually. I think that's something that we could make a note of as well. I'll save everything else. We can get back to the audio clip. We can just bring it up the next time. If you did not get to participate, there was something you wanted to mention and you didn't get to share, if you're on the line or if you didn't call in, just write it down, make a little note to yourself, and we should have ample time to dialogue once we get back from the second audio clip. That word James Crow, I hadn't heard that before either, in referencing Jim Crow, just racism, white supremacy with a new wrinkle. I'd never heard that before, James Crow. Anywho, for the folks that dialed in, if you can mute your line, that way we won't have interference for the audio. If you can't do it yourself, I can do it, and then I'll just unmute everybody once we get back from the second portion of the audio. Take good notes. Listen attentively. Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns, Context of White Supremacy, audio clip number 2.
Part 4. The Kinder Mistress. The lazy, laughing South, with blood on its mouth. Passionate, cruel, honey-lipped, syphilitic. That is the South. And I, who am black, would love her, but she spits in my face. So now I seek the North, the cold-faced North, for she, they say, is a kinder mistress. Langston Hughes, The South. Chicago. Timidly we get off the train. We hug our suitcases, fearful of pickpockets. We are very reserved, for we have been warned not to act green. We board our first Yankee streetcar to go to a cousin's home. We have been told that we can sit where we please, but we are still scared. We cannot shake off 300 years of fear in 3 hours. Richard Wright, 12 Million Black Voices. Chicago, 12th Street Station, October 1937. Ida Mae Gladney. The leaves were the color of sweet potatoes and of the summer sun when it sets. They'd begun to fall from the branches and settle in piles at the roots of the elm trees. The leaves had begun to fall when Ida Mae and George walked into the cold light of morning for the very first time in the North. Ida Mae and her family had ridden all through the night on the Illinois Central and had arrived, stiff and disheveled, in a cold, hurrying place of concrete and steel. People clipped past them in their wool finery and distracted urgency, not pausing to speak. People everywhere, more people than they had maybe seen in one single place in their entire lives, coming as they were from the spread-out, isolated back country of plantations and lean-tos. They would somehow have to make it across town to yet another station to catch the train to Milwaukee, and cart their worldly belongings to yet another platform for the last leg of their journey out of the South. Above them hung black billboards as tall as a barn with the names of connecting cities and towns and their respective platforms and departure times. Sioux Falls, Cedar Rapids, Minneapolis, Omaha, Madison, Dubuque. Footfalls, red caps, four-faced clocks, and neon arrows pointing to arrivals and track numbers. The trains were not trains, but Zephyrs and Hiawatha's, the station itself feeling bigger and busier than all of Okolona or Egypt, or any little town back home, or anything they could possibly have ever seen before. They would have to ride the La Crosse and Milwaukee Railroad for 3 more hours to get to their final stop in their adopted land. They could not rest easy until they had made it safely to Ida Mae's sister's apartment in Milwaukee. In the end, it would take multiple trains, 3 separate railroads, hours of fitful, upright sleep, whatever food they managed to carry, the better part of 2 days, absolute will, near-blind determination, and some necessary measure of faith and just plain grit for people unaccustomed to the rigors of travel to make it out of the land of their birth to the foreign region of essentially another world. The great belching city she passed through that day was the first city Ida Mae had ever laid eyes on. That first glimpse of Chicago would stay with her for as long as she lived. What did it look like at that time, Chicago? I asked her, half a life later. It looked like heaven to me then, she said. New York. A blue haze descended at night, and with it strings of fairy lights on the broad avenues. What a city, what a world. The first danger I recognized was that Harlem would be too wonderful for words. Unless I was careful, I would be thrilled into silence. The poet Arna Bontemps, upon first arriving in Harlem, 1924. New York City, Pennsylvania Station, April 15th, 1945. George Swanson Starling. In the space of 24 hours, George Starling had put behind him the splash pines and cypress swamps of his former world and was finally now stepping out of Pennsylvania Station. He walked beneath the Corinthian columns and the iron fretwork of its barrel-vaulted ceiling and into the muted light of a spring morning in Manhattan. He could see a blur of pedestrians brushing past him and yellow taxicabs swerving up 8th Avenue. Concrete mountains were obscuring the sky, steam rising from sewer grates, the Empire State Building piercing the clouds above granite-faced office buildings, and all around him coffee shops and florists and shoe stores and street vendors, and not a single colored or white-only sign anywhere. This was New York. He had made it out of Florida and was now reaching into his pocket for the address and telephone number of his Aunt Annie Swanson, the one they called Baby, who lived up in Harlem. But he couldn't find the slip of paper with her number on it, and in his fatigue and confusion, and the upset of all he had been through, couldn't remember precisely where she lived, even though he had been there before. And so he made his way to the apartment of the only friend whose Harlem address he could remember, and who just happened to be home. He took me in, and I sat there, and I tried to think, George said. The more I tried to think, the more confused I got. All the streets were numbered. What number street was she on? All the tenements looked the same. Which tenement was she in? She had moved so much. Where was she the last time he was here? Don't worry about it, the friend said. It'll come to you eventually. I'ma let you take a good hot bath, lay down, and relax a while. George got in the tub, and it came to him. Oh, shoot, I know where my aunt lives, he said, and he hurried out of the tub. Now I remember it. Now it has come to me. Maybe I needed to relax. He had crossed into another world and was feeling the weight of it all. I think I was overtired, he would say years later, from getting ready to leave and getting out of there. The friend directed him to Aunt Baby's 3-room apartment on 112th Street between 5th and Lenox, where he would sleep on the sofa in the front room until he could find work and a place of his own. He set his things down just inside her front door, and at that moment he became a New Yorker. Because unlike on his other visits to the North, this time he planned to stay. He would have to get accustomed to a concrete world with the horizon cut off by a stand of brownstones, to a land with no trees and where you couldn't see the sun. Somehow he would have to get used to the press of people who never seemed to sleep, the tight, dark cells they called tenements. He would quicken his steps, learn to walk faster, hold his head up and his back stiff and straight, not waving to everyone whose eyes he met, but instead acting like he too had already seen and heard it all, because in a way, in a life-and-death sort of way, he had. Curiously enough, one thing was for sure. He didn't see himself as part of any great tidal wave. "No," he said years later. "I just knew that I was getting away from Florida. I didn't consider it like it was a general movement on, and I was a part of it. No, I never considered that." He could only see what was in front of him, and that was, he hoped, a freer new life for himself. "I was hoping," he said years later, "I was hoping I would be able to live as a man and express myself in a manly way without the fear of getting lynched at night." Los Angeles. Maybe we can start again in the new rich land in California where the fruit grows. We'll start over. John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath. Los Angeles, April 1953. Robert Joseph Pershing Foster. Robert drove under a gray gauze sky, through the thicket of shark-fin taillights, up Crenshaw and Slauson and Century, the stick-pin palms arched high above him. He went screeching and lurching with the distracted urgency of a man meeting a blind date, picturing the first glance and dreading the faint chance of disappointment. He drove into the white sun. Everything was wide open and new. The city unfurled itself low and broad, the boulevards singing Spanish descriptions, La Ciénaga, La Brea, La Tijera. There were orange trapezoid signs staked high above the diners and auto dealerships, and neon lights at the coin-op laundries. The farther he went, the better it got. The trees were not trees anymore, but popsicles and corn cobs. The lawns spread out like pool tables, and you could cut yourself on the hedgerows. Everything was looking like a villa or a compound now. Statues and gumdrop trees marching down overdone driveways, and Grecian urns set out on the porticos. The whole effect was like a diva with too much lipstick, and he loved it, the too-muchness of it all. He was drawing near the Wilshire district and was looking for a St. Andrew's Place, where a Dr. William Beck, an old professor from medical school, now lived. Dr. Beck started practicing medicine when Robert was just learning to crawl. However hard Robert thought he had it, Dr. Beck had had it rougher. It began with why Dr. Beck had become a doctor in the first place. Decades before, his father had tuberculosis. There were no colored doctors around, and no white doctors would come out to the farm. The father died, and so the son decided he would be the doctor that didn't exist when they needed one. He specialized in tuberculosis and diseases of the lung, and would spend the rest of his life fighting what took his father away. No colored man out on a farm was going to die abandoned if he could help it. He took a job teaching at Meharry, and on the weekends went out into the country making house calls on colored families who couldn't make it into Nashville. Every Sunday, he drove the back roads to the sharecropper shacks and the shotgun houses in his crisp suits and late-model car. Some of the white people accused him of being uppity and not knowing his place. Threats and shots were fired. One afternoon, some roughnecks pulled him from his car and beat him. From then on, his wife Retha and their 2 young children, William Jr. and Vivian, rode with him whenever he went. They would drive out as a family, figuring that they wouldn't kill him in front of them, his granddaughter Retha Gray Simon said years later. Mrs. Beck was prominent in her own right in the South's distorted world of colored privilege. Her father, a dentist, was said to have been an outside child of an Alabama governor, a condition that afforded the family land and means when the son decided to set up house outside Monroe, Louisiana. The son had 13 children, and all of them went to college in the days when most colored people did not make it to high school. Dr. and Mrs. Beck were in their 50s now, Robert's parents' generation. They themselves had arrived in Los Angeles only 6 years before. They were part of the post-war flood of colored Louisianans that was turning Los Angeles into New Orleans West. Dr. Beck arrived as an elder statesman who had taught many of the colored doctors practicing there, and Mrs. Beck arrived the very picture of a doctor's wife. She was a beauty of the Lena Horne variety, who had never spent a day at work and was accustomed to maids and cooks and would thus not know what to do with either a typewriter or a mop. When they first arrived, they noticed to their dismay that most colored people were living on the more congested east side of town, east of Main Street, and far from the circular driveways of Beverly Hills. They looked further west and found a house more in keeping with their vision of themselves. It was a 4-bedroom peach stucco mansion set back from the road on St. Andrews between Pico and Country Club. The address was 1215 St. Andrews. It had a wide portico with balustrades like the bridges of Paris. It was surrounded by houses that were equally grand, and they wanted it. But the neighborhood was all white, and there was a covenant on the house that forbade the owners from selling to colored people. Still, a real estate agent managed to secure the house for them in spite of the restriction. During the early testing of limits that presaged the white flight from northern and western cities in the 1960s, realtors found ways around the covenants by buying properties themselves and selling them at a higher price to colored people by arranging third-party transfers that hid the identity of the true purchasers, or by matching defiant or desperate white sellers with equally anxious colored buyers, which together were just about the only way colored people could get into certain neighborhoods. In any case, Dr. and Mrs. Beck, bourgeois though they were, waited until after dark to move into 1215 St. Andrew's Place. But someone must have seen them. That night as they began unpacking, an orange light danced in front of the picture window. The palm tree on their manicured lawn was on fire. It was not unlike the crosses that burned in the South, except this was California. They were not new to this kind of hostility, and they decided not to run from it. They had survived the South during far uglier days, and they considered themselves upstanding people that anyone should be proud to live next to. They went to court to challenge the covenant and defend the means by which they had acquired the house. And when it was over, they had won the right to stay. The white people emptied out of the block within months. On a spring afternoon 6 years later, George Pershing Foster drew near the vicinity of the peach stucco house that his mentor had to sue to live in, to begin his own life in California. Robert had arrived in one of the last receiving stations of the 20th century migration out of the South. For most of the state's history, the distance between California and the old Confederacy had discouraged all but the most determined of black pioneers. The people were of so little means that they could scarcely take a chance on someplace so far away in the decades before the Great Migration. There was already an abundance of unskilled labor from China, Japan, and Mexico, which gave California industries little need to recruit cheap black labor from the South, had they been so inclined. Still, a small contingent of blacks had lived in California since the 18th century. There were 2 blacks among the 44 settlers who founded Los Angeles on September 4th, 1781. Some arrived over the ensuing decades, when slaveholders who moved west brought their slaves with them. Others worked as fur traders, scouts, cowboys, and miners. But even before the end of the Civil War, California, like other states outside the South, strongly discouraged the migration of freed slaves across its border. The State Constitutional Convention seriously considered prohibiting colored people from living in California. The measure did not pass, but was a reflection of the fear and intolerance directed toward them. By 1900, there were only 2,131 black people in the city of Los Angeles, out of a total population of 102,479, and only 11,045 in the entire state of California. The numbers rose slowly but steadily over the years, but did not take off during the labor shortage of World War I, as in the North. California had not been as dependent on European labor as had other parts of the country, and Los Angeles, the state's largest city, did not then have an industrial base, as did the cities of the North. But even in the low-status laborer and domestic positions that were the caste-ordered preserve of colored people in the South, colored migrants to California faced stiff competition from the many immigrants already there: the Mexicans and Filipinos working the loading docks, the Europeans in personal service to the glamorous and the wealthy. Even the seeming inapproachable shoe-shining field was competed for by the Greeks, observed a report by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s on the challenges facing black workers in Los Angeles. Trained English servants succeeded them as valets and butlers. The polyglot nature of Los Angeles made it harder for colored migrants to figure out this new terrain, where competition was coming from every direction and each minority was pitted against the others. In certain plants, Mexicans and whites worked together, the Works Progress Administration reported. In some others, white workers accepted Negroes and objected to Mexicans. In others, white workers accepted Mexicans and objected to Japanese. White women worked with Mexican and Italian women, but refused to work with Negroes. In the general hospital, Negro nurses attended white patients, but were segregated from white nurses in dining halls. In a manufacturing plant, white workers refused to work with Negroes, but worked under a Negro foreman. Into this world arrived the migrants from the South, looking for a place for themselves far from home, not knowing what to expect in a city with a whimsical caste system and no rules that anyone could see. The Becks were expecting him. Word had reached them that he was heading to California, although Robert did not alert them himself or assume he could stay with them. Driving in the middle of a foreign city, it hit him that he had arrived in Los Angeles without any assurance of anything. It was not clear who would take him in or for how long. The nearest relative was 2,000 miles away, and he suddenly started to feel alone and uncertain again. "I knew I could find a place to sleep in any hotel I knew would take me in," he would say years later, "but I didn't know what my future was." He decided to look up Dr. Beck's office and go by there first. He didn't want to give the impression that he expected to live off the Becks. "These were not relatives I was going to see," Robert said. "I didn't know the Becks would take me in." He found the address in the phone book. It was an office building on South Figueroa, number 4240. It turned out Dr. Beck was delighted to see him. "Come here, boy," Dr. Beck said, greeting him. "Of course you'll be staying with us. We've got a big house, plenty of room." Robert regaled the Becks with the story of his journey, and he told them that it was not yet over, that he was going up to Oakland to see about the prospects there. "Now, when you get through looking it over," Dr. Beck said, "come on back here and I'll give you all the surgery out of my practice." Robert was relieved and knew that Dr. Beck had the best of intentions. But he also knew he couldn't make a living on one man's referrals alone. So he made plans to drive up to Oakland and to see if it better suited him. In the meantime, he would take in L.A. Johnny Wormsley, an old schoolmate from Morehouse, took him around, brought in another guy they knew from Atlanta, Wilbur Pugh Bulow, who owned a gas station now, and showed him Hollywood and Vine, which actually meant something in those days, and Beverly Hills, the hills in general, the colored nightclubs on Central Avenue, the department stores on Wilshire, the palm trees, the billboards, the people dressed like Dean Martin and Doris Day, the broad silver sidewalks and the mansions the color of cotton candy. They rode, and Robert drank it in. He saw what he had driven all this way for, and had had in his mind for as long as he could remember, and there it was laid out before him better than a dream. "I loved it," Robert said. "I loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it." You could drive for hours and still not see the end of it. He could get lost in a town like this, be whoever he wanted to be. It was a blank canvas waiting for him to start painting on it. Big, open, hustle and bustle, he said. It was big, big, big. It was the cleanest city I'd ever seen. It was clean enough to eat breakfast off the sidewalk. Beautiful. I loved it. Johnny Wormsley gave him the verbal map of the city. "Now, Los Angeles is divided into east and west by Main Street," Johnny told him. "All the boulevards go this way, and the streets go that way. The colored neighborhoods are mostly east. There are very few of us west of Crenshaw." That meant most of the places you heard about in the movies. Bel Air, Brentwood, Beverly Hills, Malibu. They were off limits to colored people, Johnny Wormsley told him. Robert would have expected as much after his ordeal in Arizona, and was too excited to muster much disappointment. After all, the Becks were living west of Crenshaw, the lawsuit notwithstanding, and that gave him hope that Los Angeles was making as much progress as most any city he might choose. Johnny and Wilbur were happy to take him to where the movie stars lived, and maybe make a sighting. But Robert said he didn't care about that. He had already seen Barbara Stanwyck once. It was when he was based in Austria for the Army, and the colonel from Mississippi, rather than giving Robert an assignment, ordered him to make himself scarce. The Clements gave him and Alice the money for a trip. They went all over Europe, and when they were in Venice, they were standing in St. Mark's Square when they saw Barbara Stanwyck, and whoever her husband was at the time. And she whispered to him, "Look at the blacks over there," Robert remembered. I read her lips. She didn't say it in a demeaning manner, but I saw him look over to where we were, and they were giving false grins for all the populace of the city. If you see a celebrity, sure, I want to see the celebrity, but I'd seen enough not to go gaga over it. He woke up from the city's spell. The glamour was all well and good, but he had other things on his mind. "I was thinking of more urgent things," he said. "What will I do?" What will I do? I had to think about surviving. And so something compelled him several hundred more miles through the mountains, a fear that he was on his own now, far from home, that failure was a distinct but unbearable possibility, and that everyone was watching and ready to comment on how things turned out. There was a dread deep within him that he might not make it in L.A., however besotted he was, and so he prepared to drive to Oakland in order to settle on a city for good. He was weighing every nuance and eventuality, and the stars seemed to have preordained Oakland. It had more people from Monroe than any other place on the coast. He would have a ready-made clientele. He would be looking up his old friend John Dunlap, who had been in the mortuary business in Monroe, knew everybody from back home, and had assured him of plenty of patience. It was as if Oakland were sitting there waiting for him. He could not rest until he had seen it. He rode at God's knee between the two great cities of California and saw the clouds search out folds in the mountains. He made his way across the San Francisco Bay and into Oakland, which by the early 1950s had become a satellite of colored Louisiana. The shipyards and the loading docks and the railroad jobs had called out to the Southerners running from Jim Crow and had given them haven and jobs paying more than $1 an hour. They settled in the foothills of West Oakland and Richmond, far from the wealthy white cliffside mansions and nearer to the shipyards. They planted their collards and turnip greens and let chickens forage out back. Robert drove into West Oakland, past the fussy Victorian row houses and the worker cottages, turreted and marching in lockstep, barely a foot between them, roosters and pole beans growing in some of the postage stamp yards. It was looking familiar. It was looking like Monroe, which was perhaps one reason why people from Monroe had gravitated there in the first place and made a colony for themselves. It was precisely what Robert was looking to get away from. It was not living up to his glamour vision of California. It felt as if he had driven all this way for the same place he had left. He was searching for 42nd and Lusk, where John Dunlap lived. Dunlap, as Robert called him, had moved to Oakland at the height of the war in 1943, not knowing a soul. The climate agreed with him. He got a room and sent for his wife. From then on, he saw Southerners like Robert show up in Oakland looking for something they couldn't name. "They started coming every week," Dunlap said decades later. "They were coming in carloads." Dunlap had married into a family of morticians and so had taken up the trade himself. Robert was counting on Dunlap to show him around and help him build a clientele. Morticians were always good people to know. Having seen the villas in Los Angeles, Robert was expecting a spread befitting someone with the guaranteed customer base a mortician enjoys. But he pulled up to Lusk and found the little white worker cottage belonging to Dunlap. Dunlap was glad to see him and showed Robert where he would be sleeping, on a makeshift bed in the front room. He apologized for not being able to take Robert around, but he was working hard to make ends meet in this new world and was too beat at the end of the day to be of much help. It turned out Dunlap hadn't found work as a mortician in Oakland. He and other middle-class migrants from the South, it turns out, were not unlike the immigrant taxi drivers you hear about, who had been doctors or engineers back in Pakistan. Dunlap had been somebody back home, but it didn't translate at his destination, and so he had taken a job as a laborer at the shipyard. Dunlap pointed Robert in the direction of the hospitals he knew of, and the people Robert might like to see from back home in Monroe. Robert set out in the morning for the hospitals and clinics he'd heard about. He went to Kaiser, the big industrialist shipping conglomerate, to see what possibilities there might be for a medical position. He came back empty. "I'm not finding what I want," he told Dunlap. Dunlap knew what that meant. Not only was Robert having no luck finding a place to practice, he wasn't liking Oakland. As Dunlap saw it, Dr. Beck had gotten to Robert first. Los Angeles had seduced him, and Oakland did not stand a chance. Robert made up his mind and phoned Alice and the Clements about his decision, and as soon as he did, he drove back to Los Angeles to start living for the first time in his life. The things they left behind. There were no chinaberry trees, no pecan trees. Never again would I pick dewberries or hear the familiar laughter from the field truck. This was my world now, this strange new family in their cramped quarters over the tiny grocery store they grandly called the confectionery. Clifton Tolbert, the last train north. In the North and West, 1915 to 2000. When they fled, there were things left behind. There were people they might not see again. They would now find out through letters and telegrams that a baby had been born or that a parent had taken ill or passed away. There were things they might not ever taste or touch or share in again because they were hundreds of miles from all that they had known. From this moment forward, it would take great effort and resources merely to sit and chat over salt pork and grits with a beloved mother or sister who had chosen not to go. Perhaps the greatest single act of family disruption and heartbreak among Black Americans in the 20th century was the result of the hard choices made by those on either side of the Great Migration. The South was still deep within those who left, and the sight of some insignificant thing would take them back and remind them of what they once were. For my mother, a vase of Casablanca lilies far from home took her back to the memory of this. Once a year, on a midsummer night that could not be foretold, a curious plant called the night-blooming cereus would decide to undrape its petals. It was said, among the colored people in the small town South who followed such things and made a ritual of its arrival, that if you looked hard enough, you could see the face of the baby Jesus in the folds of the bloom. My mother's mother, who sang to her camellias and made showpieces of the most recalcitrant and unlovable of plants, the African violets and Boston ferns that died when other people just looked at them, did not want to leave the land of her ancestors, the drawl of small-town convention, the hard soil she had willed into a cutting garden. There was chaos in the Jim Crow world outside her picket fence, but inside there was peace and beauty, and she insulated herself in her perennial beds. She grew a night-blooming cereus on the front porch of her yellow bungalow. Its gangly branches coiled out of its pot and snaked along the porch planks. It was an unpleasant-looking orphan of a plant that was only worth growing for the one night in the year when its white, lily-like petals managed to open for a few hours when nobody would be up to see it. My mother's mother tended its homely stalks all through the year. She watched it close and made note when the buds were plump and ready to unfurl. As soon as she was certain, she alerted the neighbors as they passed her front yard with its roses the size of saucers, which she sold after some cajoling for $1 apiece, and its crepe myrtles the color of cotton candy. "My night-blooming cereus is going to open tonight," she told them. Amanda Poindexter, Miss Lily Bell Nelson, who lived up the hill and sang like a bird, Mrs. Jacobs next door, and a few other neighbor ladies on Gibbon Street would arrive at my grandmother's front porch at around midnight. They drank sweet tea and ate freshly churned vanilla ice cream. They rocked in the porch swing, which creaked as they rocked, and they waited. As a young girl, my mother sat watching on the porch steps, mystified by the grown people's patience and devotion. The opening took hours. Sometime around 3 in the morning, the white petals spread open.
Well, that was interesting. I guess there was interference on the last portion of the audio. It was a paragraph from ending anyway, so I'll read that last paragraph, make sure we don't miss anything. I'm not quite sure the last sentence that was audible, so I'll just read the last paragraph because it's not that much. The opening took hours. Sometime around 3 in the morning, the white petals spread open, and the women set down their sweet tea to crane their necks over the blossom. They inhaled its sugary scent and tried to find the baby Jesus in the cradle in the folds. Most exclaimed that they saw it. My mother said she never did, but she would remember the wait for the night-blooming cereus, the Georgia heat stifling and heavy, and take the memory with her when she left, though she would never share in the mystery of that Gibbon Street ritual again. The end. Context of White Supremacy. The number to dial is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. We should have ample time for folks if they would like to share. If you didn't get to participate during the first section, you want to share now, you should have ample time. Just don't wait until the last minute to get your hand up. The number one more time is 760-569-7676. And the code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. The folks we should have with us, let's see, Mr. Demery 4, let's see, B. Moore, and the caller at 3366. Your lines should all be open. Anybody else you're interested in participating, just press *6. We should have S. with us as well. Your lines are all open. I guess we'll try with S. since he was doing his fatherly duties. Are you able to share now, or do you still need a moment?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if anyone else is experiencing what I have been experiencing. My calls keep dropping, particularly when I press the line to speak. And I've noticed this for the last 3 weeks. That's been a pattern of, and
Oh, are you still with us? I'm not hearing you now. I don't know if you got dropped now, but I'm not hearing you. Are you still with us, Esther? Could be racist interference. Fascinating. Looks like he's still online, but I'm not hearing. Oh, okay. Looks like he got disconnected again. So that is definitely one to make note of. I guess if you are a listener and you are getting disconnected, I think B. Moore at least had mentioned that before. She was having some issues with being dropped when she was dialing in. But yeah, if you're having a problem, any of the folks that are listening in, shoot me an email and let me know. You can try using the flash phone to dial in or the app to dial in to see if that works, if that gives you a better connection. I think even 404 was saying that she was having that problem as well, but let me know if you're dialing in and having issues. I'll keep an eye out on the switchboard, see if S. dials back in. Hope it is not anything too serious other than racists and their shenanigans. The other folks that are on the line should be with us as well. I just get in really quick before I mute my line. We played a clip a few weeks back of Natalie Cole, Nat King Cole's daughter, and she grew up in L.A., and she talked about how her dad, even when he was one of the more popular entertainers in the world, how they would have crosses burned in their yard. I think she said that they would set their rose bushes that were in their yard on fire, and just all the different racist treatment that they got going to hotels. Same thing Dr. Pershing experienced, going to hotels and not being able to get a room. And this is for Nat King Cole, not just a regular quote-unquote black person. Nat King Cole, at the height of his career, couldn't get a room. No, nigga, not you. I remember that clip from not too long back. Natalie Cole talking about all the racism she and her family experienced growing up in L.A., probably during this same time period. But I'll mute my line. All four of the other folks should be with us.
Am I being heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because I thought my phone was acting up as well. What I was going to talk on is, as you mentioned, Natalie Cole and what her family went through with the real estate. It just seems that still in 2013, how black families are still going through the same thing when it comes to the purchasing of real estate, where we have to buy a used house at higher interest rates, redlining, all of these things that we are going through, to see that this family had to sue in order to get a house. And it talk about a white flight, that within a month after they were able to move into this neighborhood and these terroristic people set their palm trees on fire, they all just sold their place and they all just ran out to Dodge. And these same real estate agents, whom a lot of us like to say, oh, they're such nice white people, they jacked up the price. They bought these houses and called themselves helping black families by selling it back to them at exorbitant prices. And in some cases, these families never got their homes because on paper it was still listed as belonging to these white people, but they so-called do a quit claim deed to put you in the home. But at any given time, they can always throw your butt out on the street and say that this is their house, even though you might have paid for this house. The same thing that you went through, where you came from, where you got ran out of town, these sundown towns, your property was stolen from you. Now you went all the way out to L.A., and the possibility exists when you going through these type of unscrupulous real estate transaction, that you can possibly be thrown out of your home as not being the correct owner of these homes because of these restrictive covenants. And Pershing and what he was stating in, running around trying to get himself established into all of these medical practices and how he was turned down. The same thing happening now as a black person, and you have a medical degree, as you said, with a doctor in North Carolina who was fired because of what he said. It's just there is no respect for black people because you are not supposed to be in these professions. You're not supposed to attend to white patients, which is one reason me personally, I have never had a black I've never had a white physician. I've always had physician, so-called either black, someone's from India, or maybe someone a Chinese or Korean, but I've never had anyone white because I don't like them touching me. They're very cold. They're very rough. They don't like to look at you when they talk to you, and no, I don't deal with them. And it goes to see what Pershing went through. And the Beck family, in getting themselves established out in LA in 2013, we are no better than they were in 1953. I'll let the other callers get a chance to chime in.
B. Moore, Demery 4, and our caller at 4028. You all should all be with us if you have something to share. Again, don't wait till the last minute. Anyone else listening, if you haven't shared and you think you might want to comment, don't wait till the last minute.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Very good point that the last caller made. But the Chicago Commission on Race Relations listed reasons for leaving the South, and I noted that fear of white people was not listed on that list, but I'm sure that was on some of the blacks' minds. Also, the fear of debt and being extradited back into their previous locations. Housing covenants, like the caller just mentioned, has given way to gated communities and homeowners associations that still restrict black prospective buyers. I noted that Dr. Beck was a doctor for a noble reason. His father died, and he became a doctor so that no other black person in that rural community would be without the support of medical care. And even though he had a noble reason for becoming a doctor, he still experienced racism, almost losing his life and having to travel with his family, thinking that if his family was with him, that they wouldn't kill him. And needless to say, he was endangering his family because, I don't think these terroristic people care about whether or not your family's with you. It is kill your whole family. But he ended up leaving and went to California, ended up getting instead of a cross being burned in his yard, his palm trees were burnt. I'll just share one more thing, and I'll let someone else share. But they mentioned that Dr. Beck's wife was the Lena Horne variety, whatever that means. I guess she was drop dead gorgeous. Lena Horne had ageless beauty and was very light skinned. I don't think she had a white parent, but she had special favors because of her looks. But I guess Dr. Beck's wife did not know how to mop or, I guess, cook. I guess she didn't need to with the type look she had. I'll mute my line.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Just speak up a little bit, be more.
Okay. I mentioned it before in the beginning, but I love how she uses quotes to start the segments or the chapters. So I took note of this Richard Wright quote that she made about non-whites being able to sit where we please, but are still scared. Just taking note of the fear that was instilled in us and is still being instilled in us. And it made me think of religion and how a lot of non-white people don't want to let go of white Jesus because of the fear of burning eternally or whatever. So just that whole notion of the fear that was instilled in us and is still being instilled. I again noted how they're referring to Chicago as heaven. And then once he got to New York, he was saying there wasn't a colored or white-only sign in sight, but I feel like the feelings, the rules, the code still lingers. It may not be in writing or in the physical, but the feeling is still there. It's still there. I also took note of what Mr. Demery Ford just mentioned about the adversity or how we go through things that we go through and make it. The talk of the doctor who became one because his father died of tuberculosis when no white doctor would treat him, and he became one also because there weren't any non-white doctors. And then the last thing, which a lot of people have already touched on, is how they broke covenants, but at a higher cost. The fact that the non-white family had to move in at night when they paid more for a house than a white person. That's all for now.
Great points. To both of the last two callers' points about the quotes, she does have just phenomenal quotes to kick off the chapters. That cowbell for Lena Horne, she did marry a white man, at any rate. The quote with Richard Wright I thought was great because Demery Ford's point, I also thought that was great, that none of the people that, or at least what they verbalized, and it might have been a white person getting this information about why they left the South, none of them said, as he said, I'm scared of white people, or the white people were terrorizing us and we just had to get out of there. But I do think it has been very palpable, the fear that black people lived with, continue to live with, under the system of white supremacy. Just that quote that B. Moore mentioned from Richard Wright, he was writing about Chicago. I mean, this, I think it couldn't be more clear. It might not be expressed explicitly, but I feel like so many of these characters, they are operating with such an enormous amount of fear of white people and what could happen to them at any moment. Just real quickly, and then the other folks that want to share. Richard Wright, he says, timidly, even that, we get off the train, we hug our suitcases, fearful of pickpockets. We are very reserved, for we have been warned not to act green. We board our first Yankee streetcar to go to a cousin's home. We have been told that we can sit where we please, but we are still scared. We cannot shake off 300 years of fear in 3 hours. Richard Wright, 12 Million Black Voices. That, I think, blatant. It could not be any more explicit, and I think just based on what I've seen with Trayvon Martin and everything else, that fear is just as bad as it was 60, 70, 80, 90 years ago, and rightfully so. I will mute my line. S-Dot, go ahead.
Go ahead. You can go first.
No, I was just thinking about the migration and about how, looking at northern or western areas as heaven. When I was actually, looking at something on YouTube about the Trayvon Martin case, and I was reading the comment section, and there was a person, supposedly black, I'm assuming, saying that you need to leave this racist country and go to another country where it's less racist, or where there's no racism. And I was just thinking about this idea that racism, white supremacy is not global, and not understanding that there are different dimensions. Because I know, like, when you go overseas, sometimes black people get the feeling that there's no racism because, like, your American status, makes people initially treat you a little bit better because they're trying to get whatever American money they think you have. But all you got to do is talk to the black locals, and see that it's the same thing no matter where you go. But that's just, I'm done.
Good evening. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir. Thank you for your patience, S.D.
Extreme interference. I'll try this again. One of the things, particularly the Richard Wright quote, stood out to me because I had read that years before, and I actually used it in a paper in college because I was talking about particularly a phenomenon that I noticed whenever I get on the buses here in New York City. Black people tend to just gravitate towards the back. I've noticed it throughout my whole life, and as far as I've been alive, black people supposedly could have sat wherever they wanted to on the bus, but there still remains this need or desire to gravitate towards the back of the bus. I mean, the bus could be practically empty, and yet black people get on the bus and immediately go to the back of the bus. The same is true with the classroom. Black people will come into a classroom and immediately just gravitate towards the back. And it just makes me think about how so much of the conditioning is intergenerational to the point that it's no longer spoken, that I don't even think that parents probably even have that conscious discussion with their children about where their place is and where their place isn't. They may have grown up, if they're older parents, they may have grown up in a time where they had to sit in the back, and then as they had children where they didn't have to sit in the back, they were so comfortable and used to it that they raised them just going to the back. And now the generation that came after them have a preference for being in the back. That stood out to me. And then also, I don't know if anyone touched on it, but about the working dynamics of how it appeared that all of the different quote-unquote racial groups were all pivoting for the privilege of being able to work with white people, whether it were the Mexicans or it were the Japanese or it was the blacks or whoever. And it was also interesting, I don't know if anybody brought it up, about how they didn't mind or they endured working for a black foreman, but they wouldn't work beside a black coworker. So that was particularly interesting as well. And that's what I have to share.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think one of the things that stood out to me, I kind of chuckled when he was going to California and he said something about people dressing like Dean Martin and Doris Day. And I just kind of thought that was kind of funny to say whatever that means. But when I think about, like, going out to California, looking for this, like you say, piece of heaven on earth, and I I can remember working with a friend, and this was in the 80s, and she lived in California. She talked about how racist it was. And so, I guess the thing that's really getting me, because it's a very good book, and I know the more we progress in the book, I think it's just startling how we really haven't come as far as maybe we think that we have. And I like the part of the quote that Richard Wright said, something put in us 300 years, you're not going to overcome it in 3 hours or 3 days or 3 years. And I just think that we have to realize that. And S. has a very good point, because I know when I used to ride the bus, it was something about black people. We get on the bus and we go to the back, and how we've been conditioned. And a lot of the things that we've been conditioned to, it's still there. It really, really is. And I don't know, I just think it's a very good book. It's a very interesting book. But some of it, from 1953, some of the stuff you could put to date 2013. It's just not that much different, and there are all kind of horror stories that even abound today. When you think about what our family went through, or our ancestors went through, like you say, 50 years ago, that's not a long time. It's just not a long time. That's all I got to say.
You all were talking about the quotes that she begins the sections with. That quote, I mean, it was almost worthy of pausing the audio just to be like, whoa, did you hear that? The Langston Hughes poem that kicked off the beginning of segment 2, The Kinder Mistress. What a metaphor for moving, relocating to a different plantation. She has a Langston Hughes poem, The Lazy, Laughing South, with blood on its mouth, passionate, cruel, honey-lipped, syphilitic. That is the South. And I, who am black, would love her, but she spits in my face. So now I seek the North, the cold-faced North, for she, they say, is a kinder mistress. Langston Hughes, which would be another cowbell. But wow, that is quite a metaphor for switching and getting a new racist enslaver. New racist boss, different plantation, same racism, white supremacy.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
You made me think about the mistress thing, about how kinder and mistress, implying a white woman, that just stuck out to me, that better treatment is associated with a woman, and in this case, in this context, it would be with a white woman.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if I can be heard, what I took from it just goes to show how the dynamics, how the different groups of people, so-called non-white people, how we are pitted and how they have this hierarchy has been set up between the Filipinos, the Japanese, the Indians from India, how they have still been set up from way back in the 40s and the 50s, and giving these positions, and how black people, even though you're qualified, you're just as qualified, how they are still used so-called as buffers or whatever term that you want to call it, in order to maintain the status quo. And we are shown that we have basically no friends or whatever in this situation that we are in, that we always like to think, okay, because we are all so-called people of color, as we like to say, that we have one commonality. No, we don't. No, we don't have the same idea as to what it is we want, because wherever you go and you find black people, we are always treated the worst. Even though these people are all victimized themselves, but their victimization is not to the level as to how it is we are treated. And they are used to carry out some of the victimization on black people, as we have seen this author has mentioned in what went on in California when they went out there. And right now it's still the same way, because I know in the medical field, the nursing field, you find a lot of Filipinos that are doing on the floors. If you go in the nursing field, you find a lot of Filipino nurses on the floor. The doctors, you find a lot of them coming out from India and Pakistan that are medical doctors. You're not seeing as many black faces in there doing in the medical field. They're slowly but surely pushing us out the door when it comes to those sort of fields in the medical industry. And lastly, on the situation with, Lord, I kind of got a brain freeze again, what I was going to mention on with the, I think it was with the doctor, yes, Dr. Beck, when he said he came into the profession in order to help his people. But in order for, he wants to help his people, but look what he has done. He has sequestered himself into an all-white area where he's away from his people. He's really not, as I said, he got into that bourgeoisie mentality where they have set this class structure up and this class barrier so that they want to help their people, but yet again, they really don't want to help their people. And on the situation with the bus and sitting on the back, what I found talking to a lot of older people with that is not so much that they're used to their places, is that it has more room. Like a lot of these people who do shopping and they have their groceries and whatever, they like to go to the back of the bus where they have more room to put their things and they don't have to worry about being scrunched in the front with a lot of passengers with children and so to speak, because most people always leave the back empty. So they go back there where they have more rooms to stretch out, so to speak, and not because of conditioning of them being coming out of that system where you're relegated to being to the back of the bus.
Got about 10 minutes. 10 minutes left for folks if they have things they want to share before we wrap up. Also wanted to make note when George Starling, when he gets to New York and he can't remember the address for his aunt. He's trying to find her residence and he can't remember it. So he goes to the other black friend that he had there, and she says, well, let's just get you a bath so you can relax and it'll come to you. And he gets in the bathtub, starts to relax, and the information comes back to me. It reminded me, I think 909, he's been talking about how we have brain damage. We're not able to think properly, efficiently because of the trauma and fear that we've experienced. And they just had a report on Reuters talking about how people who are impoverished, they do not do as well on cognitive tasks just because it takes so much mental energy when you're struggling and don't know how you're going to survive and where you're going to sleep and do you have enough money for the things that you need, that those people, just the strain of all that, it impairs your cognitive ability. And I think that was a great example of that right there. George has just been on the run from a necktie party in Florida and spent the whole trip going north, complaining about gossiping Negroes, and he can't even remember vital information that he needs on where he's going to get a place to stay. I thought you got a lot of that still going on too under white supremacy worldwide. Any other comments folks wanted to make?
I thought about when he made his trek, George, up from Florida to New York, and it kind of was interesting hearing what he was escaping from and coming into, and thinking back about 10, 15 years ago, my younger brother and his wife moved from New York down to Florida, and hearing this was kind of a reverse of their experience, because they've been there for some time now, about a decade and a half, and he has shared with me within the last year or two some really horrific things that he's been subjected to since he's been down there. And I didn't even know that he was dealing with these things, and he was just, swallowing it and just not sharing it with anyone. So I thought it was interesting, particularly because there seems to be a reverse migration pattern with so many people having flocked to Atlanta and cities like that, like Charlotte, in the last decade or two. Just thinking about so many people who their parents or grandparents left for the North, and now so many of them are going back to the South. So it'll be interesting to see if someone compiled a work similar to this on how that would be in a few years. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right. Quickly, I want to note that Dr. Beck knew that Pershing would be coming back when he said he was going to Oakland to scout out some prospective job openings or a job with a hospital up there. And Dr. Beck said, well, when you come back, I'll be waiting for you. In other words, he knew that Pershing was not going to like that Oakland area. And about the ladies sitting around watching the night blooming cereus, I mean, I went to YouTube to look at that, and I guess it's pretty interesting, that the thing opens up at 3 a.m. in the morning. It only stays open for a couple of hours, and then it closes back up. You have to wait a full year for the thing to open up. And I was just thinking, at first when I heard it, that these people are out of something to do. You have 6 or 7 old women sitting around watching a flower bloom. But I guess if you look out for something for a full year, and it's only going to bloom a couple of hours, and then it's going to close back up for another year, that might be pretty interesting. I guess.
Especially if white Jesus is inside it.
Expectedly.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't remember who made the comment. Gave a different perspective for why we sit at the back of the bus. But I was thinking that, for me, I think it's still rooted in fear. I have an anxiety about people sitting behind me. It just, I in classrooms and bus, I have to be at the back so that I can see everything and everyone. And it's only then I'm calm and I can actually focus on what's happening up front. But if I'm sitting up front and there's people behind me and I can't see, I'm not focused at all. I'm not calm at all. So, I mean, in a way, it's still kind of rooted in fear, May not be, I don't know, it still might be linked to racism and white supremacy. Who knows? But I was just thinking that.
I mean, for me, I've made conscious effort to not sit in the back of the bus. And sometimes I feel, and I could just be overanalyzing it, but sometimes I feel like because I'm not sitting in the back of the bus, when I look towards the back of the bus, it seems like almost as if some folks want to say, you better get on back here, you're going to get us killed. and I just feel a little funny, But I could be paranoid.
That's that psychic residue we have from slavery, boy. I tell you.
It's part of fear, too, as sad as it is, because we have a wealth of, there's a wealth of reasons and a wealth of what am I trying to say? A wealth of history, if you want, as to why we should be fearful of white people. And I hate to say it, but it's true. I mean, we have a wealth of history of what they have done and what still possibly can be done. I mean, we're seeing a lot of people, particularly with the police, black males are being almost literally slaughtered in the streets and shot at, like the man in Florida. And, their system, look at that, comes back and says, well, yeah, it's justified what we did. So we have a wealth of history to be fearful, painful as it is.
That reminds me of an older person recently who I saw chastising some younger people who were, just standing around casually throwing the M-word around, nigger this, nigger that, and then he started chastising him. And then another older gentleman who was even older than him was like, well, sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt you. And then I asked both of them, I said, well, where does that term come from? So the eldest of the two said to me, when he was younger and he grew up in Mississippi, and he said when he was younger, they didn't care what the white folks called them as long as they didn't hit them. So they was like, they were going to call you all kinds of niggers, coons, all sorts of things on a day-to-day basis. And they would always say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And I never really thought about that expression until I heard the older person say that the other day.
White people, our enemies, they are going to function like an enemy should, and that's what they do. Call you names, all of that. Don't let them push your buttons. I think Mr. Fuller talks about that all the time. Not that that should be taken as condoning black people calling each other. I think that is reprehensible. I think that talk about residue from slavery, white supremacy. I think that's definitely something we should be trying to excise from our vocabulary like last year as soon as possible. But definitely with white people, that's what they do. Birds chirp, dogs bark. White people, tacky, trifling, terroristic, 24/7, all day long. We did our 3. We will be back tomorrow for the compensatory call-in, and we should be back next Friday for the 8th installment. We are past the halfway point of the book. I'm ecstatic. We will be done with this sometime in October. Constructive read, constructive information. I'm looking forward to getting to the end, seeing how things evolve as we get more information. But tune in. 8th installment should be next week, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, and make sure to tune in tomorrow for the compensatory call-in, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, and 6 p.m. Pacific. News reports, workplace racism, white supremacy. Anybody want to do the prayer to conclude things? Right on. I will do it myself. Thanks all for participating. Hope it was a constructive investment of your Friday evening. Again, if you have Essence Magazine, if you don't have it, you can go to the library or whatever. Probably go to the grocery store, nab a copy if you want. But Isabel Wilkerson, she does have a piece on racism. It's with Dr. David Williams. They list the article on the front cover. It's about a 5-page article, and they talk about anti-blackness. They talk about how white people are a bit more refined with regards to their racism, white supremacy, and how this impacts black people in all 9 areas of people activity. They talk about how even black people have this anti-blackness as a result of what white people have done to us over the centuries, and they give out suggestions towards the end on things that black people can do to mitigate and manage the stress and strain of racism, white supremacy, meditation, eating correctly, just things to take care of yourself, things to do if you're going to the hospital and you already know these racist doctors are not going to do right by us, things you can do to try to manage that situation. I thought some of it was pretty constructive. It's definitely worth a read. Isabel Wilkerson, Dr. David Williams, the September 2013 issue of Essence. Thanks all. Hope it was constructive, and we'll be back tomorrow. Invest if you think the program is constructive. racism-notes.blogspot.com. PayPal is in the top right. Listener supported. Creator, give us the strength to honestly acknowledge and confront our fears of white people. We have every logical reason to be fearful of white people. Help our ancestors, our family, aid us, give us the courage to acknowledge and confront our fears and our white enemies. We have many examples, not just in this book, but many examples of black people who have shown infinite amounts of courage against white terrorists worldwide, have stood up to insurmountable odds, risked and given their lives in an effort to replace white supremacy with justice. Each and every one of us can and should be willing to do the same. Help us to not be paralyzed by that fear. Give us the strength and courage to be intelligent, strategic, logical in dealing with our eternal enemies, racist man, racist woman, racist child, master terrorists of the known universe. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. C.O.W.S, signing out.
I'm a victim, brother.
No problem. You're a victim.
Man, I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
Even my conditioning has been conditioned.